Welcome, 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 welcome. Glad you are all here with me. As you can see, I am in front of the bookshelf, the unnamed diet bookshelf. I am about to open some unnamed diet beverage and pour it into an unnamed diet cup. Yes, what a day, folks. What a day. I have the bookshelf. It's just like the old days. Remember Saturdays, how it used to be before the COVID, before the pandemic, when I had other things to do during the week than get on social media. And I would only stream on Saturday or Sunday, and I would sit in front of this bookshelf. Do you remember those days? Those far off, distant days. Well, it turns out, folks, the good old days, the happy days are not yet here again, but I am once again sitting in front of this bookshelf, and I do once again have unnamed diet beverage in my hand. It's early enough in the day that I can drink this unnamed diet beverage without staying up all night. After this broadcast, I intend to eat some evening meal, and then after that do a home workout, a quiet workout that I can do from my home. So I've got a long evening ahead of me. I went out and soaked in the sunlight this afternoon. Had a good chat with my good friend Paul on the phone. And then we had a great conference call with some of the Center for Political Innovation folks. So the night is young. Even though it is pitch black outside here in New York, it looks like after midnight outside. I mean, it's the sun goes down, and it really goes down. Even though that is what is happening, I'm still here with you. I'm sitting in front of my bookshelf. I'm drinking unnamed diet beverage, and I'm happy to be here with all of you. So, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell, right? Because you want to be notified when we do this. Be sure to post this on Twitter. Be sure to post this on Reddit. Be sure to post this as a status on your Facebook, Socialist Interpretation of Art. All right, Socialist Interpretation of Art. All righty. Yes, it's a lovely afternoon. Keep the super chats rolling in. Our normal format, if you are not used to it, is I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do our roll call, or I call you out as I see you. We find out about the amazing community of people who are watching today. And you all are an amazing, amazing community. All of you have a very, very, very special place in my heart because you participate in these broadcasts. Don't doubt it for a minute. I'll call you out, names and locations. And then from there, I answer your super chat questions until they run out. And then I say goodbye. That's how we do. It is a 3-part show, right? First opening bit is my opening remarks. Second part is the roll call. Third part is my answering your questions. What is your view on DM25 and Giannis Varoufakis? Writing it down. Giannis. Alrighty, so folks, why don't we jump into my opening remarks today? I just want to give a little bit of a roundup of what's been happening in our world as it is December now. We are heading toward the holiday season and the new year. What has been happening in our world? Folks, there was a disturbing report in the Washington Post about the fact that Americans are hungry, and as a result, all right, wrote it down. As a result, writing them down as they come in, writing down the super chats. As a result of the fact that unemployment is through the roof, as a result of the fact that Congress still has not determined what it's going to do about an economic stimulus, as a result of the fact that we are having a pandemic, there are many Americans who are stealing food in order to survive. Stealing food in order to survive. And there has been a rise in shoplifting of food across the United States. The richest country in the world, supposedly the greatest country in the world, has a population of people who are so hungry they are risking arrest, risking legal penalties, and stealing, pilfering if you will, in order to survive. That is the nature of the American economy. That should be a source of national outrage. That should be something that drives people up the wall. That we in the United States have got a situation where our population is desperate to eat, and we have a rise in people stealing food in order to survive. This is something that should fill people with just absolute burning outrage. Just burning outrage. And, I mean, if that doesn't upset you, I don't know what does. And what else is new? Joe Biden is set to come into office, and it seems like Joe Biden's strategy for winning over the American people will be to make it appear that he got in and completely turned things around when it came to COVID-19. Joe Biden is saying that when he gets into office, there will be a 100-day mask mandate in all federal areas. I don't talk about people I work with. There will be a mask mandate in all federal areas. A mask mandate. And in addition to that, the vaccine from Pfizer has been approved by the FDA panel, and it appears that this vaccine from Pfizer will be available. There will be 50 million doses of it that will be available, 50 million people. There'll be two doses per person. So 50 million people will be able to be vaccinated by Pfizer. Hopefully other companies' vaccines shortly behind it. That seems to be the situation. Meanwhile, today in Washington, D.C., Trump supporters have piled into the Capitol to have a demonstration in support of U.S. President Donald Trump. They have piled in big numbers. Big crowds of people are there to support Donald Trump, to wave their Trump flags, to chant "Make America Great Again." That seems to be happening, and thank you, Niall, for the super chat. It is greatly appreciated. So there's a big demonstration of Trump supporters in the Capitol. People in red hats waving Trump flags. The Proud Boy organization, the white supremacist group, is visible among the protesters, though they are a small grouping. They are certainly not the entire demonstration. Big showing of support for Donald Trump in the Capitol today. Of course, there are left-wing demonstrators that are opposing it. Yesterday, here in New York City, there was an interesting incident where there was an immigrant rights demonstration that had taken to the streets, and a car drove through it and hit 5 people. Now, no one was killed. Some people were injured and taken to the hospital. And it turned out the 2 women who were in the car were drunk. They were drunk, and it did not appear to be a politically motivated or planned act of terrorism. It was 2 drunk women in a car, one of them being a drunk driver, joyriding around Manhattan, and they plowed into this immigrants demonstration, injured 5 people. That occurred. They were arrested by the police. It was determined that this was not a calculated act. Now, I don't know if the women that were driving the car even knew what the protest was about. U.S. foreign policy toward China. U.S. policy toward China. Wrote it down. And yeah, I mean, that happened yesterday. I will say that yesterday, I made a point of stopping by Times Square in Manhattan on my way home. I usually just get on the train close to my office, but this day it was really nice weather outside, despite being wintertime. It was quite warm. So I strolled down 42nd Street, all the way over Juche and DPRK, all the way over to Times Square. And I will say there was something about being in Times Square that just kind of lifted my spirits, right? That Times Square, right, there's a pandemic on, but this time of year, people do their Christmas shopping and stuff. It usually has a lot of people, and there were actually quite a few people in Times Square. They weren't all right up next to each other. Everyone was social distancing. But there was a decent amount of people walking around Times Square, and one thing that was rather obnoxious was there were a number of people on motorcycles who were circling, it seemed, around Times Square, and every time they would get around an area where there were lots of people, they would do wheelies and rev their engines really loud. And it just was a little more vibrant, right? I spend a lot of time at this office where I'm all by myself pretty much. There's barely anyone else there because of COVID-19. I sit around my home, but being in an atmosphere where, we were all wearing masks, we were all pretty far away from each other, but there seemed to be life. There seemed to be community. That was a little bit, refreshing. I was not thrilled with the loud cars, but, it was a little bit refreshing to be in that area as people were just kind of convening, and it seems like there is still life in Manhattan. New York City is still New York City despite everything. And that was kind of a shot in the arm. It was like a boost to me. It raised my mood. My mood tremendously improved just seeing these crowds of people in masks, just seeing the lights of Times Square. I felt rejuvenated. I felt rejuvenated by the entire experience. It was quite delightful to once again see life in New York City. So I'm glad I made that decision. I wanted to mention that these rallies that are happening, right, in support of Donald Trump, there seems to be a little bit of confusion, right? Because what is the message? Now, I actually just asked an honest question on my Facebook last night. I asked the question, they are warning that you should not take the vaccine if you have a, quote, severe allergic reaction. Now, I am not a medical professional, so I did not know what that means. But I do take allergy medicine every day. I take Flonase, I take little allergy pills, and without that, sometimes I can't breathe through my nose. I mean, I've got a big issue with allergies, especially since I moved to this city where air pollution is particularly extreme. So, I wondered, would it be safe for me to take the vaccine? So I just asked the question on my Twitter and on my Facebook. I said, no politics here, just wondering. Asked the question. And I got some very interesting responses. One individual said to me that I know, they said, that Caleb, COVID-19 doesn't exist, and you're going along with this FU. And I thought, I actually know a few people who've gotten COVID-19, so I really don't think it's a hoax. And the person was quite angry with me. Got other people who said, do not take that vaccine, Caleb, stay 100 miles away from it. Got other people who said, I've had the same question. I have allergies and I take, Flonase and is it safe? But then a couple medical professionals responded and they said, well, as we are not doctors, we can't 100% give you a legit answer to this. But in the reference to vaccines, when they refer to severe allergic reactions, they are actually referring to the vaccine reactions. If you have had a severe allergic reaction to a vaccine, that's what it refers to, right? There are some people that are allergic to what is in the vaccines. It is not environmental allergies that they are referring to. It is rather vaccine allergies. So there's a difference, right? The allergies you get, you wake up in the morning, your nose is running, your eyes are itching. That's one thing. But people who get a vaccination and, they can't walk for 2 or 3 days or it makes them physically ill, that's where you got to be careful. So according to these folks, I should be fine to take the vaccine. So that's a conversation my wife and I will have to have. We'll cross that bridge as we come to it, as they say. But at this point, it seems like the vaccine is going to be available, and it could be a game changer. Now, we know that Biden is going to try and use that for political gain. He's going to say that he turned things around, he saved the day, and that could be what gives the Democrats the upper edge. And I'm going to talk more about that as we continue with this conversation. Now, I thought it was interesting. I was talking on this conference call with a few people. There are some good friends of our program who are from Louisiana. Shout out to Jacob Maxey. Shout out to Edward. They are both from Louisiana, both originally from the state of Louisiana. And both of them talked about how their grandparents loved Huey Long. And I love Huey Long, by the way. I absolutely love Huey Long. Huey Long was the governor of Louisiana from 1928, and then he eventually became a senator, but he was still acting as the governor. You know, he had somebody like a placeholder up until his assassination in 1935. Huey Long, and I like Huey Long. Huey Long is a progressive figure in American history. In fact, Huey Newton, the founder of the Black Panther Party, is named after Huey Long. Now, there's a lot of confusion about Huey Long, but Huey Long was a governor who came to power in a fight against the Ku Klux Klan. He supported Roman Catholics. Louisiana has a lot of Roman Catholics in it, and he supported the Catholics against the KKK. He actually increased the rate of black voting in the state of Louisiana, and he was a populist, right? His slogan was, "Every man a king, but none shall build a crown." All right, left, right. Every man a king, but none shall wear a crown. And that was Huey Long, right? And Huey Long launched something called the Share Our Wealth movement. And he was a very, very good figure. He taxed the Standard Oil Company, and he used the tax revenue to pave roads in Louisiana. He wiped out illiteracy in the state of Louisiana. And he was seen as a fighter for the working class in Louisiana. He was a populist. And there's this whole confusion. People say he was a fascist. He was not a fascist. However, he was anti-Roosevelt. Because you have to remember, Roosevelt was in an alliance with the Standard Oil Company. Like the Rockefeller family of New York, Roosevelt was kind of a Bonapartist for their section of the ruling class against the factory owners, the National Association of Manufacturers. Well, Huey Long, it was mostly a rural state in Louisiana. You didn't have much manufacturing in Louisiana. And Huey Long, he rose to power by fighting against Standard Oil Company, right? Because Louisiana has lots of oil. It is an oil-rich state, and so Huey Long rose to power as a Bonapartist figure representing the rest of the ruling class of Louisiana in a fight against the big oil monopolies that were based in New York City that dominated the economy of Louisiana. Standard Oil had absolute power. Huey Long came to power on a platform of fighting against Standard Oil. And he came to power and he taxed Standard Oil Company and used the money to build schools and hospitals. He was basically the Hugo Chavez of Louisiana in the 1930s, and he was quite powerful. He built the Share Our Wealth movement. They tried to impeach Huey Long on 2 occasions, I believe, and the capital of the state of Louisiana was flooded with working people, low-income farmers. They piled in to the state. They surrounded the capital. Thousands and thousands of working-class people piled in, and the implication was that if Huey Long was impeached, things would start to go up in flames, and so they backed away and didn't impeach Huey Long. And Huey Long was quite a figure. He was quite a figure, and he was a champion of the oppressed. He was referred to as a communist in Louisiana media. People compared him, interestingly, they compared him to the Union Army and Abraham Lincoln. And there was an attempted coup against him by the state militia of Louisiana, and they compared him to a Northerner and to Abraham Lincoln and to the Union Army, right? The right wing, the business owners of Louisiana, they considered Huey Long to be a dangerous socialist demagogue. Meanwhile, the working people of Louisiana liked him. In fact, he was assassinated in 1935. A very strange case. A man shot him on the Capitol steps, and then Huey Long's bodyguards proceeded to blow away the person who shot him so much with bullets that there was no way to really, do forensics and determine what had actually happened because the body of the person who shot Huey Long was so mutilated. So that makes people wonder if there was a wider conspiracy or something to that effect. But regardless, Huey Long was killed. Afterwards, after Huey Long was killed, there was a country song that was recorded called The Death of Huey Long. The opening lines of the country song go like this. Oh, they shot Huey Long in Louisiana, where he walked up the Capitol steps. Yes, they killed Huey Long in Louisiana, where he took on the capitalists. Everybody knew Huey Long was a populist. He was a socialist. In fact, his mentor in Louisiana politics was a member of the Socialist Party of Louisiana. And the British miners' strike of 1984. That's a good question. All right, British Miners' strike. 1984. Huey Long was a populist. Huey Long entered a Bonapartist alliance with one section of Louisiana's ruling class against the big oil companies. Roosevelt was in a Bonapartist alliance with the section that Huey Long was fighting against. So Roosevelt and Huey Long did not get along with each other. And that is why you have to remember the Communist Party referred to Huey Long as a fascist. That's why, right? You have to remember the Communist Party took the position that all non-communists were what they called social fascists. And they argued that Huey Long was a social fascist, right? But there's actually an interesting book by none other than Earl Browder, leader of the Communist Party USA. And it's quite an interesting book. This is a collection of essays that Earl Browder published in 1935. It was published shortly after the death of Huey Long. This is What is Communism by Earl Browder. And even though the Communist Party had referred to Huey Long as a social fascist, there is a chapter in this book, Chapter 5, Huey Long's Assassination. And if you read it, it becomes clear that even though they were not supporters of Huey Long's, the Communist Party considered the assassination of Huey Long to have come from the right. They considered it, this is the Communist Party. The assassination of Huey Long was an event of far-reaching political significance, right? Surely it was an ill omen for the presidential election of 1936 when one of the outstanding candidates, a national political figure, a center of controversy in Congress and the country at large, met his death from the gun of the hands of a political assassin in the very halls of government. If the presidential campaign should develop further along the line indicated, our country is facing bitter days. How can the assassination of Long be considered in any other sense? Is it possible to consider it a mere incident dissociated from the mainstream? It goes on. If you read this article, while they're not endorsing Huey Long, they consider the assassination of Huey Long to be a sign that the forces of fascism are on the march in the United States. So even though the Communist Party had referred to Huey Long as a social fascist, when he was killed, Earl Browder published this essay analyzing it, basically saying that his assassination came from the right. So it's a complicated situation, and this is the thing. Politics is often quite complicated. Politics is often very, very, very complicated, right? Things are not so simple, right? Huey Long and Roosevelt were on the opposite sides of a divide in the ruling class. The Roosevelt faction was supporting organized labor unions and aligning with the Rockefeller Standard Oil Company. Meanwhile, there was another section of the ruling class, the Republicans, right? Henry Morgan, Henry Ford. They were factory owners, and they were not supporting labor unions. Instead, they were supporting fascism, right? And, they wanted to get rid of Roosevelt and set up a fascist dictatorship, and they didn't like labor unions. Roosevelt, on the other hand, wanted to beat back the power of the National Association of Manufacturers and the factory owners on behalf of the Rockefellers by building up organized labor. This was a divide in the U.S. ruling class in the 1930s. On the one side, you had factory owners who hated unions and wanted a fascist dictatorship. On the other side, you had the Rockefellers, who were okay with labor unions for the most part, just so long as they were allowed to dominate the global economy and beat down any emerging competition. As long as British capitalism and American capitalism could rule, if we have to have a couple labor unions at home, they were okay with that. That was the divide. Now, Huey Long was in Louisiana. Louisiana was a state that did not have very much manufacturing. And because of that, Huey Long was opposing Roosevelt because Roosevelt was aligned with the Rockefellers. And so that was the division in the ruling class. Huey Long ended up on the side of the ruling class that was opposing Roosevelt. And he was announcing that he was going to run against Roosevelt in the 1936 presidential election. And he was a wildly popular figure, wildly popular. His speeches were listened to by millions of people. He was a hero. His Share Our Wealth movement was exploding. And then he got shot down on the Capitol steps of Louisiana. It's a very strange story, but it shows that in a time like this, there are divisions within the ruling class. And when these divisions within the ruling class emerge, workers are recruited to mass movements. The capitalists fight with one another. The capitalists fight with one another. right? And this is how these things work. This is what capitalism in decay looks like. When capitalism is in a crisis, there are big divisions in the ruling class. Music and art to teach socialism. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now, I wanted to mention a couple things along those lines, because we're in a period now where capitalism is in crisis. Mass unemployment, mass hunger, the computer revolution has just driven capitalism into crisis. This is exactly what Karl Marx wrote about in Capital. This is exactly the concept of overproduction. This is why we're in a capitalist crisis. Forgive me if I'm forced to repeat myself, but it bears repeating, right? Because there seems to be a lot of confusion about what the Marxist concept of overproduction is, right? There's some individual who we have decided, all right, to be honest, there's an individual who we've decided to refer to as Skippy the Bear. And this individual does not understand the difference between overproduction and the Marxist theory of overproduction and the Malthusian concept of overconsumption and overpopulation. They are completely opposite concepts, but this clown, Skippy the Bear, who's on the internet, that's not the name he goes by, but I don't want to advertise for him. This clown called Skippy the Bear does not understand the difference between those two concepts. One is completely different from the other. All right. Vietnam labor law. All righty. And I want to just quickly explain, if you want to understand why we are having a capitalist crisis right now, sure, COVID, but what is underlying the problem behind COVID-19? You need to understand the problem of capitalist production. The capitalist makes profit from the labor of the worker, right? This is called surplus value. We got to start out with surplus value. So I'm just going to explain surplus value very quickly, right? Let's say you're making a pen, right? The pen costs $10. That's $10 for the price of the pen, right? So you're going to need the materials to make the pen. Say they cost $5, right? You're going to need to ship the pen. That's going to cost $1. But on top of that, you're going to need a worker to assemble the pen. That's going to cost $4. Total cost is $10, right? But here's the problem, right? If the worker gets paid $4 and the price of shipping the pen is $1 and the materials for the pen are $5, where does the capitalist make the profit? He can't make any profit that way. So the only way the capitalist can make a profit is by cutting into the labor of the worker. So the worker, even though the value that the worker puts into the pen is worth $4, the worker is only going to get $3 so that the capitalist can get $1 in profits, right? So surplus value, the profits of the capitalist, are extracted from the labor of the worker, right? This is the basis for the Marxist theory of exploitation, right? Because the profit, this $1 the capitalist is making on every pen, right? This is extracted from the labor of the worker, right? So that is exploitation, right? The worker is not getting the full value that he puts into the pen. He puts $4 into the pen, but he's only getting $3 because his labor is exploited, right? And the surplus value is how the capitalist makes profits. Now, the fewer workers that are involved, the fewer workers the capitalist has to hire, the more profits he gets, right? And the lower the capitalist can pay, the lower that the capitalist can pay. Was there a mathematical error there? Am I really? No. See, someone just gaslit me in the comments. That's funny, right? So 5 plus 1 plus 4 equals 10. 5 plus 3 plus 1 equals 10. Oh, God. Right, I left out the 1. There you go. See, this is why I don't major in math. So 5 plus 1, right? You still have the shipping costs, plus 1, plus 3 plus 1 equals 10, right? Wow, right? We left out the shipping when we wrote the second formula. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? But anyway, someone gaslit me in the thing and got me all confused. But yes, right? Right? Now we're doing the math again. 5 plus 1 plus 4 equals 10. However, the worker cannot get the value of their 4, right? So 5 plus 1, the materials plus the shipping costs, plus what the worker gets paid, plus the surplus value of the capitalist equals 10, the total cost of the pen. So anyway, right? In order for the capitalist to make a profit, he has to cut in to the value created by the worker. However, he can make more profits by driving the wages of the worker down. He can make more profits by hiring fewer workers, replacing workers with machines. The capitalist is constantly trying to maximize his own profits. And in order to do that, he is revolutionizing the means of production. He's revolutionizing the means of production, making the means of production more and more efficient. More and more efficient, right? The technology becomes more and more efficient, and fewer workers get hired at the assembly line. Meanwhile, the workers who are hired are easier to replace because the amount of skill and training that each worker needs is reduced. So the worker is driven out of production, replaced by machines. There's a constant competition between the worker and the machine. And as this is going on, as fewer workers are hired, as those workers who are hired have their wages lower, as the working class gets poorer and poorer and poorer because the capitalist is producing technology and making production more and more efficient, as that goes on, as that process goes on, you get to a situation where pretty soon the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold, because at the end of the day, your worker in this formula is getting paid $3. The total cost of the pen is $10. There is no way that 3 can equal 10. The labor, the wages of the worker paid for their labor, can never be enough to buy back the product that is produced. Capitalist production for profit makes it mathematically impossible for the working class to purchase back what it produces. In order for the capitalist to make profits, in order for the materials to be paid for, in order for the shipping to be paid for, there is no way that the working class can purchase the product that they produce. It is not mathematically possible. 3 does not equal 10. It's not possible. And because of that, capitalist production has a built-in problem. It is naturally unstable, and it goes through a boom-bust cycle, right? Where, the market, things are being produced, there's very efficient, people are being hired, but pretty soon the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold. Pretty soon, mass abundance and mass leaps in production lead to great poverty, right? Capitalism is a system where people are hungry, not because there is not enough food, but because there is too much food. Capitalism is a system where people are homeless, not because there isn't enough housing, but because there is too much housing, right? This is the economics of capitalism. And that understanding that the capitalist is constantly driving to produce as much as he can, but in the process, he drives the worker into greater and greater poverty so that the worker cannot buy the product he's producing, right? The ability of the worker to consume is driven down as the ability of the capitalist to produce goes up. This is the problem of overproduction. That's overproduction. That has absolutely nothing to do with Malthusianism. Malthusianism is the idea there's just too many people in the world, they're useless eaters, they consume too much, and the food supply doesn't keep up with the population growth, so we need to reduce the population, make everyone poorer so that we don't have this problem. There are these excess people created, and they're useless eaters, and there's not enough, for them, and we're going to have a big environmental catastrophe if we don't reduce the population, and there's just too much stuff, and growth is bad, economic growth leads to catastrophe. What Skippy the Bear believes in, which is that there are too many people in the world and we're producing too much stuff and we all need to be poorer and the population needs to go down because there's just too many people. That has nothing to do with Marx's theory of overproduction. I just laid out what the Marxist theory of overproduction is. The Marxist theory of overproduction is that capitalist production, because it's irrational and organized for profit, creates a situation where the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold. And Marx and Engels and the entire socialist movement has said that the way to resolve this problem is to have central planning of production. Central planning of production. And the central planning of production would lead to an efficient production not organized for profit, so that abundance could increase. Malthusians, on the other hand, argue that there's too much stuff. People are using up too many resources, and we're going to have a big environmental catastrophe unless we all get poorer and unless the population goes down. Skippy the Bear believes there are too many people in the world, that they're using too much stuff, that growth is bad, and that capitalism is bad because it's encouraging growth. That's what he believes, and he wants to see an overall reduction in consumption, which probably means a reduction in the population. What I believe is that we have a highly irrational system called capitalism based on production for profit. And if the economy were centrally planned and not left in the hands of profiteers, abundance could greatly expand. Plus, we would use resources in a rational, long-term way. We would get rid of fossil fuels. We would get to higher modes of production. We would start developing things way beyond, energy sources way beyond the fossil fuel markets. This is the answer, and thank you, Chase, for your super chat. This is Marxism. Marxism is an ideology that is about growth, but it's about rational growth, not profit-based, erratic growth, right? Not the irrational market and the capitalist grabbing to make more profits, but centrally coordinated, centrally planned growth, right? This reminds me, I wanted to mention this. PragerU, right? Right-wing YouTube channel. Right-wing YouTube channel loves to, spew right-wing concepts. One of their talking points, I've heard this my whole life, right? I have heard this my whole entire life. There has been this notion that, if you say that they have free healthcare in Cuba, somebody always speaks up and says, it's not free, somebody's got to pay for it. And you say they have free healthcare in Britain. It's not free, somebody's got to pay for it. Right? You say they have free education in France. It's not free, somebody's got to pay for it. Right? We've heard this many, many times. It's not free, somebody's got to pay for it, right? Well, here's the thing. By that logic, nothing in the world is free, right? McDonald's. McDonald's gives children who go to McDonald's a free toy with their Happy Meal. Did you know that? It's not, but does somebody have to pay for that toy? I mean, does some worker get paid to manufacture that toy? Does some resources go into it? Does a worker put their labor into producing it? Yes. So when McDonald's says, you know what, we give a free toy in every Happy Meal, it's not free, someone's got to pay for it. Right? Nothing is free according to that definition. Everything costs something. Right? Every product in every store involves human labor to produce it, human labor to ship it, resources from the earth, nature are put into it. So by their logic, when they're like, healthcare is not free, nothing's free. Free means you don't pay in order to get it. That's what free means. That's what free means, right? If I go to the store and they say, wow, we have a program going on, here is a free pen, no one's claiming that pen just arose out of nowhere and that no one put any resources into it, nobody paid any money for it. No. What they mean at the store when they give me the free pen is that I don't have to pay them for the pen. At the time that I get the service or product or whatever it is, I don't have to fork over some cash. In that sense, it's free. So yes, they do have free healthcare in free healthcare in Britain. Yes, they have free healthcare in these countries. Suggestion, CPI Reader, a compendium of excerpts from American socialists. All right, CPI reader. Suggestion. Very good. I actually wanted to raise something about that. All right, and Skippy the Bear wants to reduce the population, but this doesn't address the crisis of overproduction as it still continues. Obviously, he's caught in a philosophical cul-de-sac. Exactly. He does not understand that what I'm advocating by talking about the Marxist concept of overproduction and the Malthusian reduce the population, everyone's spending too much, there's too much growth, and it's hurting Mother Nature. He doesn't understand that, and I lay that out, and many times, and he attacks me over this, and says, oh, he's accusing me of all kinds of things. No, what he says in his videos, that, oh, people are using too many resources, that's a Malthusian idea. Too much stuff, growth is bad, that's Malthusianism, right? Marx's concept of overproduction are completely different concepts, right? What he's saying is that humanity has gone too far. What I'm saying is that humanity is being held back, and we are being held back by the irrationality of the market. He is so stupid, he cannot understand that these are two different concepts. Marx never said people don't have enough stuff, or people have too much stuff. That's nowhere in Marxism. Will you ever find anyone saying, oh, there's too much stuff? Marx ripped Malthus to shreds. Overpopulation, so there you go. But anyway, thank you, David Fox, for understanding that. But it's just as dumb as this PragerU conception, right? It's not free, somebody has to pay for it. Nothing in the world is free. All wealth in the world is created by nature and human labor. The source of all wealth in the world is nature and human labor. There is no product in any store that doesn't cost somebody something. Right? There is no service that you can get that doesn't cost somebody something, right? Their argument, when they say healthcare in Britain is not free, somebody's got to pay for it, right? When they say it's not free, you said they have free college in France. It's not free, someone's got to pay for it. When they said that, say that about Twitter, right? Twitter's not free. The advertisers pay for it. How does Twitter maintain itself? Advertising. So Twitter's not free. The advertisers have to pay for it. YouTube. I'm on here. I'm not paying any money to do this, right? But it's not free. Advertisers pay for it. So, this is the irrationality, right? And so if we're going to play that game, we have to eliminate the word free from the English language. It's a logical fallacy. And they only ever apply it to the government. You'll notice they don't play this word game. Someone's like, hey, I just set up a Twitter account for free. They don't go, someone's got to pay for it, because they don't mind. It's the private sector, right? If a store is giving away free pens or free samples of their latest hot dog or whatever, they don't go, it's not free. At the end of the day, what PragerU is trying to do is push austerity. They don't like the idea that rich corporations have to pay taxes so that poor people can have things like food stamps. And they don't like the idea that working class people, get to go to public schools in the United States, and they don't have to pay up front. They get it, for free at the point of service. So by jumping up and saying, if it's from the government, it's not free, free means you don't hand over cash at the time you receive it. That's what it means. Healthcare in Britain and France and Germany is free in the sense you don't pay for it. Do people pay for it in taxes? Of course they do, right? YouTube, it's free in the sense that you don't pay to get on YouTube, but it's paid for in terms of advertising revenue and other things. This is a logical fallacy, and it annoys me. It really, really annoys me that no one can kind of wrap their minds around this. It's not that hard to understand that nothing in the world is free, right? And that just when you point out that things that social democratic countries have are paid for in tax revenue, that somehow it destroys the argument. That's not, you haven't destroyed anything. It's not a logical response. And so I just wanted to get that out there, right? We talked about the problem of overproduction and how that is completely different from the Malthusian concept of overconsumption and overpopulation. Those are completely different concepts. Now we're talking about PragerU and their concept that it's not free if the government does it, which is, if they're playing that game, nothing in the world is free. We've talked about these things. So very, very good. Very, very good. Couple other things I wanted to mention, right? is I think we should all be very concerned about the politicization of mental health, right? I think, in the process of the Black Lives Matter protests, defund the police, you'll notice that a lot of money was created so that mental health workers would have an increasing role in the police departments. Now, that's a good thing. It's a good thing, right? A mental health worker can de-escalate situations that cops don't. There's a lot of situations where the police come in, they have a confrontational attitude, there's a person who might have a mental health problem, and that mental health workers are trained in de-escalation. So that's a good thing. It's a good thing that police departments have more mental health people on staff. That's a good thing. And it's a good thing, I think, that police departments are having their funds reduced and that we're becoming a less policed society. But with every good thing, there's a negative. Right? With every good thing, there is a negative. Right? In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan cut government funding for mental health facilities. Now, he pointed out, and the media was full of accounts of bad things that went on in mental health facilities across the United States. And the things that they pointed out were very, 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 very true. There were a lot of bad things that happened in mental health facilities. There were people that were put in these mental health facilities, and they were put there and they didn't belong there. There was abuse of people that went on. There was the use of, electroshock therapy as punishment. Bad things went on, right? And there was corruption. Bad things went on. But what was the result, ultimately, of getting rid of the mental health facilities? Was a huge uptick in homeless people. Now there are homeless people all across our streets. A lot of them are people that are mentally ill and would have been in a facility, and now they're wandering the streets. And in a lot of cases, because they're wandering the streets, they end up getting arrested or getting into a fight with somebody, and they end up in prison. In a lot of ways, prison has replaced mental health, and that's not good. The jails are full of people that should just be hospitalized and given treatment. Instead, they're out, roaming the streets. They're homeless. They end up becoming desperate. They get into crime. They get into fights. It's a mess, right? So what Reagan did, on the surface of it, he seemed like he cared. He seemed like he cared about the people that were being mistreated in these facilities, but they all ended up on the streets. Now we're seeing the reverse, right? What we're seeing now, I am convinced, is the reverse. So now, right, we see police brutality, we see all of this, going on, police brutality and all of that. So we're defunding the police departments. We're increasing the role of mental health in the policing departments. But now I'm starting to notice there's a huge crackdown on anything that they consider to be a conspiracy theory. And if you read about it, anyone who questions the U.S. government is being declared to be insane. And now I am very concerned that as Kamala Harris and Joe Biden get closer to the White House, that we're going to start seeing politicization of mental health. If you don't agree with the U.S. government, if you're making noise, if you're a dissident, well, we'll declare you to be insane and forcibly hospitalize you. Overproduction of debt. All right. I think that's a real danger right now. Right? I mean, increasingly, we are seeing a situation where if you are a political dissident, you are labeled as insane and dangerous. And this is already happening. Look on the internet, right? There's all kinds of things. Psychoanalyzing Trump supporters, credit creation, the driving force behind capitalism. All right, socialist banking, credit creation. Banking. All right. Now, I think we should be concerned about this, right? We're already, the fact that our police forces play a political role, and you know that they do. If you add to that increasingly on the internet, they are declaring that conspiracy theories, i.e. anything that goes against the standard narrative. If you don't think Russia rigged the 2016 elections, you are a conspiracy theorist. If you if you do think that there was any foul play whatsoever in the 2020 elections, you are a conspiracy theorist. You're a threat to public health, and you are mentally ill. I'm concerned that now that we're seeing an increasing role for the mental health professionals in our policing system, the next step is going to be the hospitalization of political dissidents. I am actually deeply concerned about this, right? And it fits the liberal way of doing things. Liberals are not big on punishment. They're not big on vengeance, right? They're not big on things like the death penalty and spanking children and people getting to pay for what they did wrong. They're not big on that, right? They're more into things that seem compassionate and friendly, right? And it's like, oh, you don't think that the USA should violently overthrow the Syrian government? You must be crazy. We're going to put you in a facility. We're going to pump you full of medicine. And hopefully, after a while, you come to understand that America is spreading human rights all over the world. And you'll be allowed to come out. Are we clear on this? I think this is going to happen. I think this is the direction we're moving in. I think that the more managerial wing of the ruling class is moving in this direction. Now, I mean, obviously, we do have a big mental health crisis in our society. Psychiatry is not all right. But Michael Parenti has written a great book. It's a very short book, too. It's a quick read. I think I read it in a single sitting, called The Culture Struggle. Very good book by Michael Parenti, in which he talks about how the mental health field, from its inception, has been corrupted. They considered it a mental illness on the part of slaves if they wanted to escape. And they did studies. What drives slaves to want to not be slaves anymore? They must clearly have a mental illness. They did studies on this, right? They treated it as a mental illness, right? We all know the term nymphomaniac, right? That's used in pornography, and people use it differently now. But it means sex addict. Where did the term come from? Well, it came from the fact that if a woman was not sexually satisfied by her husband, right? If she wanted more sexual satisfaction than she was getting from her husband, if she started to have extramarital affairs or to seek sexual satisfaction in another way, this was considered to be a mental illness. It was considered to be a form of mental illness on this woman's part, and she was considered to be crazy, right? That's where the term nymphomaniac comes from. Right? There's a long history of psychiatry being used in a political way. And so the fact that there's an increasing role of mental health in our policing departments, number one. The fact that, number two, that the liberals are pushing this, and they're the ones pushing for a crackdown on conspiracy theories. The fact that they are declaring that, dissident ideas and conspiracy theories are, quote, a threat to public health, number one. And on the other hand, at the same time, they are declaring that people who don't agree with the U.S. political establishment, it's simply a reflection of their mental illness, because you have to be crazy not to support U.S. imperialism. I think we're heading for a period where psychiatry will increasingly play a role in the repression of dissent, right? And the sad thing is, there is a big mental health problem in our society. Look at the suicide rate, for goodness sakes. Look at it. It's through the roof, right? Look at the suicide rate. Look at the rate of depression. We have a big mental health problem in our society. And under the guise of addressing that problem, I am convinced that there is going to be political repression in the name of mental health. And that is something that should be eerily disturbing to any dissident person, right? And we should keep our eyes out for it. I can guarantee you that Kamala would love to see anybody who talks about her true record. Kamala Harris would love to see anyone who talks about her true record as a vile, disturbed human being, a narcissist with sadistic impulses. I'm sure she would love to see the mass locking up and silencing of anyone who points her out. But we'll talk about her a little bit later. I wanted to quickly mention that I have said many times to keep your eye on Andrew Yang, right? Andrew Yang, presidential candidate on a platform of universal basic income. Andrew Yang appears to be running for mayor of my city, New York City. Now, he hasn't fully announced, but all signs point to yes. Andrew Yang appears to be setting up a presidential campaign or a mayoral campaign for New York City. And I think that's very exciting. I think it's very exciting. I think it's very exciting. I mean, there are things Andrew Yang says that I don't agree with, and his idea that universal basic income is a solution, that's not my belief. But I think that Andrew Yang is a very exciting figure. And his book, The War on Normal People, it criticizes capitalism in the same way that I have. It talks about the same problems. He also has become the champion of pointing out that the Democratic Party has basically decided that it is not going to try and win over low-income white people. And that the Democratic Party has become the party of identity politics and abandoned class politics. And Andrew Yang is very good in a lot of ways. He's potentially dangerous in some others. But the fact that Andrew Yang is running for mayor of New York City, it appears, that's a good sign. Like I said, keep your eyes on Andrew Yang. There is a lot of potential there. Bernie Sanders is old. He's been doing the same thing for so many years. So many years he's been doing the same old thing. It's a good thing he does. I like Bernie Sanders raising awareness. But Andrew Yang is young, and he's got some exciting ideas. He seems to push an almost technocratic message. He emphasizes that he's good at math. He has some quirky concepts about getting rid of the penny and paying college-level athletes. And I see some real energy in Andrew Yang. Keep your eye on Andrew Yang. Now, he could potentially move in a bad direction, or he could be forced by material conditions to move in a very good direction. He is an aspiring Bonapartist figure. He represents a more managerial wing of the ruling class that is more aware of the problems down below, right, and the problems in actual American society. And keep your eye on him. He is an aspiring Bonapartist figure. He has the potential to be an American Roosevelt. Roosevelt was American. He has the potential to be a new Roosevelt. He has the potential to be a new Abraham Lincoln. He also has the potential, to be a Hugo Chavez. I mean, he could drive forward the contradictions of U.S. society, potentially. He could move in a socialist direction, but he also has the potential to be an American Adolf Hitler. Let's not forget that, right? That Bonapartism can take very different shapes. It evolves and adapts based on the contradictions within the ruling class, based on the factions. Andrew Yang is full of potential. He could be very, very dangerous, but he could also be very, 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 very good. He has loads of potential. He is a loaded figure, right? And he has potential. He's not a standard politician. Would you consider going on Matt Parrott's Radio Free Indiana? I don't know who he is, but probably. I don't know why I wouldn't. I generally go on shows when people ask me to go on, so I don't see why not. If that person is inviting me on, they should send me a message, Twitter, send me an email, But yeah, Andrew Yang, keep your eye on Andrew Yang. He is way more tuned in to the problems facing U.S. society. He has way more Bonapartist aspirations, and he represents a minority, I think, within the managerial bourgeoisie. Not even all of the managerial bourgeoisie is ready to get behind him. He was blacklisted by MSNBC. His message about, populism and the Democratic Party appealing to low-income white workers and having a 50-state strategy is something that many in the ruling class find to be very threatening. And I don't think universal basic income is really the solution. But Andrew Yang has loads and loads and loads of potential. He has loads of potential. Folks, we are heading into a period of prolonged capitalist crisis. The computer revolution has ripped capitalism apart. It is never has there been such a huge leap in technology, right? Capitalism enters a prolonged crisis when there is a huge technological leap. World War I came after a long period of economic downturns, and that long period of economic downturns was created by huge technological breakthroughs. World War II came after the Great Depression, and the Great Depression came after the huge technological breakthroughs of Henry Ford on the assembly lines and all kinds of technological breakthroughs. We are now in the prolonged crisis created by the computer revolution. The industrial worker has been eliminated from the assembly line. The market is full of products that cannot be sold. The living standards are dropping. Millions of people no longer have a place in the economy. And we are we are facing a prolonged capitalist crisis. There's actually a very important book that I recommend, and I may not agree with the political organization this man started, but I find this book to be extremely profound. It's called The Future is Up to Us by Nelson Peary. Nelson Peary was a Maoist. He was a member of the Communist Party USA. He was kicked out for refusing to abandon the black nationalist position. He started something called the Communist Labor Party, which was a Maoist party that was around for a long time. And he wrote this very, 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 very good book called The Future is Up to Us. I have bought many copies of it, and I have given it away to many people. Read this book. It is very, very important. It explains what's going on here. It explains why the left needs to completely reorient itself and how we operate. This book by Nelson Peary is on point. This man understood the problem, and he understood how we need to change in order to win. I am a huge admirer of Nelson Peary, and I have learned so much from his writings. I also enjoyed his book, his memoir, Black Radical. Very, very good. Nelson Peary was a brilliant revolutionary organizer, and he understood what was happening. This is not a new book. He died, and this book was published in 2001. 2001, this book was published, but it's extremely important, and I recommend it. If you want to understand what is happening with the computer revolution and how socialism and leftism needs to change in order to win, you need to read Nelson Peary's The Future is Up to Us. I think it's online. The PDF is online. It's on the Marxist Internet Archive. It's around. Read what Nelson Peary had to say. He got it. He got it, right? He got it. Nelson Peary understood this, and Nelson Peary is on point. He's a big inspiration for me. And Nelson Peary, if you read it, he's an advocate of left-wing populism. He's an advocate of left-wing patriotism. He talks about, class collaboration as united fronts. He talks about Bonapartism. Nelson Peary gets it. He's a very, very important writer, so I really encourage you to check him out. Now, I wanted to just end my opening remarks by talking about Kamala Harris. Folks, I wrote a book about 50% of the Person of the Year. Time magazine gave Person of the Year to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Well, I wrote a book about Kamala Harris. This is a study of Kamala Harris. I used her life to make 3 political points. And if it were up to me to name a Person of the Year, I would have given it to someone different. I would have given it to someone different. What are your thoughts on AI, machine learning, automation? AI, machine learning, automation. All right. I would have given it to somebody different. If it was up to me. The unnamed diet beverage, we need a government of action to fight for working families. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. Person of the Year would go to Tulsi Gabbard. Now, I know Tulsi Gabbard, people are immediately going, she's got issues there. I'm not voting for her. I'm not endorsing her as a political candidate. But I want to say that we have a political system that is designed to serve the ruling class. Right? It's designed to get done what the ruling class wants done. Never in my lifetime have I seen 2 minutes of national television be so effectively used as the political knockout that Tulsi Gabbard delivered to Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris was rising. She was getting all kinds of publicity. She was a front runner. Tulsi used less than 2 minutes, less than 1 minute on the debate stage. Tulsi Gabbard was considered a fringe candidate. She went on the air. She went on the debate stage. And she just laid it out there about Kamala Harris's record. Kept people in prison beyond their sentences in order to use their cheap labor. Tried to keep an innocent man on death row. Locked all these people in jail for smoking marijuana and then laughed about it just laid the facts out there. Kamala had no rebuttal. After the debate, Anderson Cooper was with Kamala Harris and gave her yet another chance to rebut it. And all she could come up with is, Tulsi is friendly with Assad, as if that makes anything she said about her career as a prosecutor untrue. And after that, Kamala Harris was done. Kamala Harris was done. There has never in my life been such an effective political knockout against someone selected by the ruling class. The ruling class, when they saw it, they didn't see it coming. They had no idea that Tulsi Gabbard was going to do that. They were sitting there, and Tulsi Gabbard started talking, and she's like, just so you know, Kamala Harris, who, Silicon Valley have all picked, and is the part of the regime change faction that I'm against, here's what she's done. Boom. Kamala Harris had no response. She's never refuted any of the claims. And Kamala Harris got less than 1% of the vote in the Democratic primary. Less than 1% of the vote in the Democratic primary went to Kamala Harris. She was the media was in love with her. They put her in the center of the stage, and they let her, and she was rising. They were gonna. Tulsi just said, "Oh, it's my turn. Just so you know, this is who Kamala Harris really is." She was down for the count. It was a Mike Tyson political knockout. This was Muhammad Ali on American television. Never has a candidate that the ruling class has put all their resources and all their promotions behind been so thoroughly knocked down on national television with the truth. It was an epic moment. And as a result of that, they had to maneuver to get Kamala Harris to be selected as the vice president, because the American people, the Democratic Party, they were never going to accept her. That was a big moment. And because of that, I mean, if I had to pick a person of the year for this show, I would say Tulsi Gabbard was the person of the year. Now, Tulsi Gabbard, she has some problems. She's very close to Modi in India, who is at this point facing a rebellion among his people because he's sold them down the river with neoliberal economic reforms. Modi, who has abandoned the people of India and joined this trade war with China, is now facing a mass uprising. So she's really on the wrong. She's tied her boat to the wrong port by supporting Modi. But regardless, Tulsi Gabbard, by almost saving us from the horror of Kamala Harris, I give Tulsi Gabbard a pretty big thumbs up. Now, my book about Kamala Harris and the Future of America, it's gotten some good reviews. It was reviewed in the Morning Star, the communist daily newspaper in the United Kingdom. It was reviewed, Max Perry, a good journalist, a great anti-imperialist journalist, reviewed it for a number. His review was picked up by a number of web publications. So, I hope that you've gotten a copy of my book on Kamala Harris. I talk about the Silicon Valley fascists and the divisions in the ruling class. I talk about Huey Long. I talk about Stalin and Mao and all kinds of stuff in this book. Get yourself a copy of the book today. I hope you enjoy it. And on that note, we are now, at this point, approaching the time for the roll call. My opening remarks are done. It was just kind of a roundup. And on that note, let's do the roll call. Names and locations, and then I'll start answering your super chat questions. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Who's with us? England. Oh, thank you for the super chat. Ryan in Philly. Thank you, Lumpa Logic. Bernie in the Manchester, United Kingdom. Kendall in San Diego. Cleveland Pirate Alex. Henderson, Nevada. Norway. Australia. Lift and Carry Land, Austria. What does that mean? I don't know. I miss Jimmy, Edinburgh, Los Angeles, Mo from Toronto, Canada, Melbourne, Australia, Logan, Utah, Lafayette, Louisiana, Gallon in Hendersonville, Cincinnati, Alex in Salem, Oregon, Elliot in California, Burma, Belfast, Max Hessen in Boston, Max the Sax in Virginia, Spam Time, Alex in Bulgaria, Sicily, New Jersey, Lubbock, Texas, Brian in Manassas, Virginia, Paul, UK. All right, FVK, Memphis, Sweden, Korea, Incheon, Korea, Liverpool, UK, Espoo, Nico, I don't know where that is, Hong Kong, not in China, Dayton, Ohio, Galen in Hendersonville, North Carolina. New Jersey. Staten Island. Brian Schaefer in Illinois. Los Angeles. Alexander the Great in Alexandria. Alberta, Canada. John in Houston. Ben in Denver. Queens, New York City. Lloyd Bennett. T-Mac, Trevor in Ireland. Brendan in New Jersey. Auckland, New Zealand. Orlando, Florida. Union, New Jersey. Springfield, Missouri. Mohsen from Iran. UK, moving back to Spain next week. Makato, Minnesota. Athens, Greece. St. George, Utah. Dresden in Germany. Glendale. The Netherlands. Frankfurt, Germany. JT24 in Mississippi. NYC, Heavy Dukes. LE from Chicago. St. David's, Bermuda. Herald in Naples, Florida. Vault 7, Fairhope, Alabama. Washington, Land of Love. The Death Star in a galaxy far, far away, says David Fox. Wow, I did not know you were in the Star Wars universe. Shah Yar from Maryland. Les in New York City. Get Back Before No Deal. Devin from Uranus, the planet. Very good, very, very, very good. Utah, Australia, Oz. Lagos, Nigeria. Netherlands, very good. Northern California. Nate from Sydney, Leipzig, East Germany. Berlin, Athens, Greece, where it all began. Very, very good. I'm glad you all are here with us. I'm glad we're having a lovely East Sussex block trolls tonight, right? You know, very, very good. Very, very good. I'm glad you all are with us tonight. Plenty of unnamed diet beverage. Very, very good. Very, 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 very good. Glad you are here. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Be sure to put this on Reddit. Be sure to put this on Facebook. Be sure to put this on Twitter. Be sure to put this on Bunker Chan, Sao Paulo, Brazil. Balthazar in Oakland. Be sure to put this on Bunker Chan. Be sure to put this on Instagram. Be sure to TikTok your favorite clips of this, right? Let's have lots of fun. How many people? All over the country, all over the United States, all over the world. This is an international crowd, right? Lots of fun, folks. So be sure to do your part and make this a bigger audience. The more, the merrier. Bring all your friends. We're having a great time hanging out. And now is the part of the show where I just keep answering. I'm Bill Clinton. And I just keep answering your questions. I just keep answering them. And you keep asking me questions. I keep answering them because I'm Bill Clinton. Shaniqua from Buffalo, New York. All right, that stopped being Bill Clinton when I said Shaniqua's name. I don't know why. It was fun. Fun times, right? Fun times. Yes, said Sage. All right. Very, very good. I'm glad you all are with us, folks. I really enjoy doing these lives. I really enjoy doing them. They're very, very fun. So there you go. Jenny Lynn is with us. She's from Cincinnati. Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. All righty. So Hungary. So Ben Toth is from Hungary, right? That's good. All righty. So socialist interpretation of art. Well, I must say, I will just be honest. A closer look at my bookshelf. Closer look at my bookshelf. I must be honest with you all. I have been utterly disappointed by Lenin's writings on art, Trotsky's writings on art, the writings of various socialist leaders on art and culture. Because most of their, you'll buy a book or you'll get a book from the library, Lenin on art, Trotsky on art, various Marx on art. And it'll be a compilation of articles and essays that basically say, we really ought to have some socialist art. We really ought to have some socialist culture. It's a little bit base level. They don't get into great detail about what socialist art and culture should be like. And that's a bit of a disappointment. And unfortunately, we know about the Frankfurt School and Adorno. And because of all of that, there is a lot of talk about what socialist art and culture should be like from not very good sources. So that is kind of a gaping hole. One thing that I do think is interesting is the Soviet Union was not a big fan of rock and roll music, not a big fan of the Beatles, and that they really did promote classical music. And in my conversation with Jyoti Brar from the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, the CPG-BML, she emphasized, classical music is good. And one thing that I have heard about the Soviet Union is that in the Soviet Union, the symphony was for the people. Average working class people went to the symphony. The symphony, the orchestra was not for just wealthy people, right? That there was a mass, popular appreciation of art and culture, right? And that they didn't have crass commercialized art for the masses. They had art, an art for all of society. The films of Sergei Eisenstein are a great artistic contribution from the Soviet Union. Sergei Eisenstein is the father of the montage. I actually just watched his movie the other day, Ivan the Terrible. But if you watch, this guy made silent movies mainly. He started getting into talkies later. But you watch October, the movie about the Russian Revolution. You watch The Battleship Potemkin, a very, very exciting film about sailors rising up on their sailing vessel during the 1905 Russian Revolution. It's great stuff, right? Shostakovich and the music, that's great stuff as well. And that there was a flourishing art and culture in the Soviet Union. They made very good films. And that you get this idea that in the Soviet Union, everyone was persecuted, there was no art, and that's a huge oversimplification. There were restrictions in terms of the political content of art, certainly. But actually, there's a quote from George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, where he talked about how Soviet filmmakers actually had more artistic freedom. They did not have political freedom. But that studios, big studios in the United States, they tend to be very, very commercially oriented, and they very much control what goes on in the films, whereas Soviet filmmakers, other than the political restrictions, were much more free to produce art the way they wanted it. I will say I'm disappointed. I can't give you a list of writings about socialist art and culture because I find a lot of what I have read about socialist art and culture to be very, 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 very disappointing. So what is this? UBI, charter schools, no federal job guarantee, neoliberal. All right. Why Maoists in the Philippines have been more successful than in India? UBI, charter schools, no Fed jobs, neoliberal, and Maoists in Philippines versus Maoists in India. Alrighty, we can answer both of those questions, both very good questions. All right. I don't know enough about Yanis Varoufakis or his movement to really comment on it. And I have a responsibility to you all. As much as I want to give a very thorough answer to that question, I don't know enough about it. I have not studied enough of Yanis Varoufakis' work in order to give a proper assessment of it. So out of my responsibility to you, I cannot give you an answer yet. I must make a point of reading his work and coming to assess his work before I comment on it. So unfortunately, that's where it's at. Now the next, and that was asked twice, so I think that answers both of those. Now the next question I got was, why would a leftist respect Putin or modern Russia? Simple, right? If economics means anything to you, right? Which, honestly, for a lot of people who call themselves left, economics means absolutely nothing. But if economics means anything to you, I will point you toward a book you should read called The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. Now, Naomi Klein, some of the conclusions she draws in here, and I don't agree with everything in this book, but it's full of very, very good information. And Naomi Klein, who is a socialist, she's associated with Democratic Socialists of America and such, she has an entire chapter in here, not an entire chapter, an entire part in this book about the fall of the Soviet Union. All right? She talks about the capitalist id, Russia in the era of the Boer market, looting of Asia, and the fall of the Second Berlin Wall. Right? And she describes what happened in Russia and the former Soviet Union after the fall of the Soviet Union, after the fall of communism, after the fall of the socialist governments, after the Marxist-Leninist parties were forced out of power. She describes shock therapy economics and mass economic catastrophe as a result of those shock therapy economics. Mass hunger, mass starvation, and she's not the only person to do it. She wrote it in a way that it could be on the bookshelf at Barnes & Noble. But it is a fact that the restoration of capitalism and the implementation of neoliberal free market economics in Russia in the 1990s had a catastrophic result. Millions of people died. Sex trafficking was through the roof. Opioid addiction was through the roof. Mass unemployment. Elderly folks lost their pensions. I've talked to people who visited the former USSR or lived in the former USSR at the time. Near every subway stop, you would see all kinds of elderly people begging for money on the street. People who'd worked their entire lives. Suddenly they had nothing. They're begging on the street. Mass homelessness, mass poverty, mass suffering. Now, why should a leftist respect Putin or the current government of Russia? Simple. Putin got in and fixed it. He got rid of neoliberal economics. He utilized the energy sector, namely Gazprom, a natural gas company owned by the government, and Rosneft, an oil company owned by the government. And he used state control of energy to stabilize the economy and rescue it from PragerU free market neoliberal policies. Right? Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman economics had been imposed on Russia by the United States, mainly by the Clinton administration, and Putin got in and reversed it and stabilized the economy. He brought poverty down. He raised people out of poverty. He started, reindustrializing Russia. Worked out pretty well, and he's created a farming boom. Now there's a farming boom in Russia. He has done a lot to improve the lives of people in Russia. Now, if that matters to you as a leftist, if rescuing people from economic catastrophe matters to you, if stabilizing the economy, if getting rid of neoliberal policies that are genocidal, under Frank, the U.S. economist, actually said that what was being done to Russia in the 1990s was economic genocide. Hundreds of thousands of factories closed their doors. 80% of the farms shut down. If that matters to you, you will have some respect for Putin. But if it doesn't, if being a leftist is just a big cultural wank, right? It's all just about, cultural issues, and if that doesn't matter to you, then I guess you shouldn't have any respect for Putin and the government of Russia. But if economics means anything to you, that'll matter. And folks, the most blatant example from this period, and this is very important, right? I want to go over this. In 1993, after the fall of the Soviet Union, they had an election, and the Russian people voted for a Duma, or a parliament, made up of communists and Russian nationalists who tried to stop neoliberal free market economics from destroying the country. There were communists, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. There were also, nationalistic and right-wing elements. But they were elected to the parliament to try and stop Boris Yeltsin's genocidal economic reforms to serve Western capitalism. And the memo went out, right? Yeltsin declared that this anti-austerity parliament was a, quote, red-brown alliance. This is where the term red-brown alliance comes from, mind you. It's a term used to smear legit leftists. They accused this parliament the Russian people had elected out of desperation to stop economic destruction of their country. They accused it of being a red-brown alliance. And Yeltsin then used his emergency powers under the Russian Constitution to dissolve the elected parliament, to overturn the parliament the population voted for. And so the parliament refused to leave, the military was sent in, and 187 people died in an episode of chaos and violence in Russia's capital city, right? In Moscow, chaos and violence. And nobody in the United States or France or Germany protested, except for a few groups, the Workers' World Party, a couple other groups. I think some British communists protested. But other than that, all the Trotskyites, all the Maoists, even most of the official communist parties in the world said nothing. Why did they say nothing? Because Western media and all these voices promoting leftism said that, you can't support this elected government You can't support it because it's a red-brown alliance. Right? And is it true that some people in this parliament said anti-Semitic things? Yes. Is it true that some people in this parliament said anti-gay things? Yes. Was that the issue? Did the people of Russia vote for the Communist Party and for these nationalist groups because they just hated gay people and Jewish people so much? No. They elected an anti-austerity parliament to stop their country from being ripped apart by neoliberal economic reforms that were killing people in the streets. And the synthetic left, the fake left, the internet, crowd said, well, don't protest against it. That's a red-brown alliance. The term red-brown alliance is a genocidal, murderous term. It is a term used by fake leftists to justify sitting back and doing nothing as the elected government of Russia was destroyed so that Wall Street and London could sink their fangs into Russia and kill millions of people. That's what happened. Look at the drop in life expectancy during the 1990s. The forces in Russia that stood up against austerity and economic devastation were labeled by the pseudo-left, hustling, cultural liberal State Department socialists, thank you, Dosh. They were labeled as a red-brown alliance, so only the tankies marched and protested against what was going on. So that term, red-brown alliance, if you ever hear anyone start to warn about, a red-brown alliance, bing, 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 that's where that word comes from. They are a pro-austerity leftist. What that means is anyone who's anti-austerity, anyone who opposes the economic looting of countries, any communist who's like actually a communist and not a hippy-dippy Antifa liberal, but an actual communist, any nationalist around the world, anybody who actually opposes imperialism, I consider to be a fascist, right? That's what that word means. If you ever hear anyone say red-brown alliance, go ding, 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 that person is a fake leftist. That is a fake leftist term. That is a term that was used to justify the destruction of democracy and the imposition of austerity. That term should make you sick to your stomach. Red-brown alliance. It is a disgusting term. It was a term used to impose austerity, right? The people of Russia in 1993 did not elect a Duma of communists and nationalists because they hated gays or they hated Jews. They elected a Duma of communists and nationalists because they wanted to stop austerity. They wanted to stop being economically devastated. But the excuse that they were a red-brown alliance was the justification for most of the left in not taking any action to oppose the destruction of the Duma and the looting of Russia. And millions of people died as a result of that. Russia's population in the 1990s, according to Naomi Klein, decreased by roughly 10%. People either left the country or died. 1 in 10 people either left the country or died. Right? They call that economic genocide. The red-brown alliance term is a term used to justify economic austerity. So that's what you should know. Why should a leftist respect Vladimir Putin? Again, if all you care about is, cultural stuff, Putin's culturally conservative. He is, right? He's a conservative fellow. Now, he says he personally has no problem with homosexuality. He says he has no problem with it. But, he is very proud of Russia's past. He is an Orthodox Christian. He's conservative. He defends, the traditional family and stuff. So if all you care about is cultural issues, if economics means nothing to you, there's nothing to admire about Vladimir Putin. But if economics actually matters to you, if whether or not people have food to eat, whether or not people have jobs and health care, if that means anything to you as a leftist, you can admire Putin in some ways. Alrighty. Glenn Greenwald. Well, Glenn Greenwald is furious about the fact that he was not allowed to criticize Joe Biden right? And he quit The Intercept. It was a very dramatic thing that happened, and unfortunately, I mean, people are saying he said some anti-Chinese things. Well, his overall point is correct, is that the way the Hunter Biden scandal was treated by mainstream media and just obscured and silenced, you weren't allowed to point it out. It was banned from Twitter and Facebook. That is so extreme. That is Silicon Valley meddling in our elections. So his overall point is correct. Now, you want to get into the nitty gritty, and he said some anti-Chinese stuff. Well, I tend to think that socialism in China, and I have a positive view of the Chinese Communist Party, so I don't agree with that. But he's right to be angry, right? I mean, the way he was basically directed not to criticize, the art and culture or I'm sorry, not to criticize Hunter Biden. I mean, that's I'm sorry, but and that's the thing. It puts us in a weird spot. Hegel and Spengler. All right. It puts us in a weird spot. Right? We're in a weird spot. Right? Because, I don't like Trump. Do you think I like Trump? I mean, Trump sickens me. When he gets up there and socialism is the most evil ideology ever, it's failed everywhere it's ever been tried. I hate that, right? When he says what he says about immigrants, it disgusts me. When he says what he says about Muslims, it disgusts me. Right? And so I am never going to be a Trump supporter. I'm never going to campaign for Trump. I'm never going to say Trump is good. Nicaragua Ortega. Never going to say Trump is good, but at the same time, I recognize that the faction that wants to get rid of Trump is also evil and has an evil agenda, right? And so that puts us in a weird spot, right? And so Glenn Greenwald, he's in a weird spot too. I don't speak for him. I don't know his political views. But, sometimes if you're a genuine progressive, right? If you look at what Kamala Harris is all about, if you look at what Joe Biden's all about, if you look at the Silicon Valley fascists who basically run liberal politics in the United States at this time, you're in a weird spot, right? Because on the one hand, you see that they are engaging in censorship. They're trying to control what we say. They're trying to basically silence dissent, label anything that doesn't go along with what they say as essentially a conspiracy theory that shouldn't be allowed to be presented to the public. What they're doing is very, very dangerous, right? But at the same time, are the opposition any good? Is Donald Trump any good? Is Joe Biden any good? No, he's not. So, I mean, it puts us in a weird spot. And Glenn Greenwald, I understand. He's in a weird spot. I mean, I am not a fan. I did not endorse any candidate as a journalist, and I did not vote for either of the major candidates. I did not vote for Biden. I did not vote for Trump. I live in New York. So my vote doesn't really matter. I voted for a third party, and I won't tell you which one it was. But, and I, in good faith, couldn't vote for either candidate, right? It used to be that the Democrats were the lesser of two evils. That's how it used to be. It used to be Democrats were slightly better, right? They often betrayed their voters. They often, but if people voted for them, it showed that people were generally a little bit better. Not anymore. Not anymore. Trump campaigned on a platform of I will end the wars. Joe Biden campaigned on a platform of I will start the wars. I will escalate the wars. Right? I mean, that it's not so simple, folks. And we're in a weird spot. And look, I mean, evil is evil. Silicon Valley fascism, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, there is a load of evil there. A load of evil. All right. U.S. policy toward China. Well, what's that old expression, right? I'm supposed to have what do you call them? Suspenders on. If I had my druthers, right? If I had things as I would like them, if I had my druthers, why, if I had my druthers, I, Caleb Maupin, would favor the United States getting along with China and joining the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. If it was up to me, I would think that the United States and China should be best pals. And, we could have joint research projects. Imagine that. American universities teaming up with Chinese universities to make new breakthroughs in technology, instead of going after Chinese scientists, instead of stigmatizing Chinese students who are here to study. Imagine American labs and Chinese labs teaming up. Imagine that we rebuilt the New York City subway system, and instead of having it be a crumbling mess that's full of delays and breaking down and smells like urine, it was rebuilt by the China Railway Corporation, and we had a sexy, high-speed subway system that was up-to-date and amazing. Imagine that. Imagine that we in the United States joined the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Belt and Road. And instead of invading countries and destabilizing them, we were working with China to build the infrastructure in the developing world and raise people out of poverty. And we would get richer as other countries got richer. Win-win cooperation. Win-win cooperation, not imperialism, not destruction, not keeping the world poor so that Wall Street and London can stay rich, but win-win cooperation, optimism, research and development, funding of science, improving the educational system, raising people out of poverty, coordinating all of society. Yes, I think the United States and China should be friends. I think the United States and China could collaborate. We could, if the USA and China teamed up, we could save the world. We could wipe out Al-Qaeda and terrorism. We could wipe out the scourge of drug addiction. We could defeat fossil fuels and solve the problem of climate change very quickly. If China and the United States teamed up when it came to environmental research and nuclear energy research, if the United States and China teamed up to build infrastructure around the world, the United States and China teamed up to reindustrialize the United States with new high-speed railway systems and new computers and new scientific research and huge funding of research and development, if the USA and China were to work together, if we had a real government of action in the United States, a real government that knew what was best for the country, not what was best for the big corporations, and we teamed up with China, we could do some amazing, amazing things. Charles de Gaulle. All righty. So yes, if it was up to me, the USA and China would be friends. The USA and China would be friends. All righty. Juche and the DPRK. Look, the Korean people have been subject to amazing horrors, right? I mean, the Korean War, millions of people died. U.S. troops, there was always a threat of a new war. U.S. military buildup in South Korea after the fall of the Soviet Union. You had what was called the arduous March period, where North Korea had food shortages because they couldn't buy oil to run their tractors, and millions of Koreans starved to death because of U.S. sanctions that prevented the Korean agricultural system from moving ahead. Most of the land in North Korea is not arable. It's a mountainous country, and so they've worked very, very hard to develop an efficient food system. What the USA has done to North Korea in terms of killing millions of people, in terms of keeping the country locked down, what the USA has done to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is absolutely horrendous. Now, what is utterly amazing is that through all of this starvation, all of this economic isolation, throughout all of this, the Korean Workers' Party has remained in power and has kept the loyalty of the population. Any other government under such circumstances would be overthrown. Right? I mean, it is amazing the loyalty that the Korean Workers' Party has built up among the population. That probably indicates that there is something worth looking into in terms of their ideology. Juche ideology, right? The self-reliance ideology of North Korea is for Koreans. It's not for the United States. It's for Koreans, okay? So I would never want to impose Juche in the United States. That would be silly. It's not my ideology, not my country, not my political background. But does that mean that if one is serious about building socialism, one is serious about building up an impoverished people, if one is serious about understanding how socialism can withstand huge attacks, and, it might be necessary that people would want to study, and I have volumes and volumes of Kim Il-sung's writings, right? Got them right here, right? Kim Il-sung's selected works, right? I've got, Kim Il-sung. It's worth looking into. Why have they been able to stay in power? Why have they been able to withstand so much, right? Why? It's worth looking into. It's worth coming to understand it. If you want to understand how, North Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, has stood up to such an onslaught, and why they've maintained the loyalty of the population amid everything they've been through, you might want to learn what they have to say, right? And that's it. That's all there is to it, right? Like I said, we should study all of this. We should study Mao, we should study Stalin, we should study Trotsky, we should study Lenin, we should study Bolivarianism and Baathism. We should study all of this and blindly adhere to none of it. None of it, right? I am not a Jucheist. I'm not a Bolivarian. I'm not a Baathist. I'm not a Stalinist, right? I'm not even strictly a Marxist-Leninist, though I'm heavily influenced by Marxism-Leninism. That's probably the biggest influence on me ideologically, but I'm not strictly a Marxist-Leninist. I have my criticisms, right? I believe in God, for number one, right? Marxism-Leninism is strictly materialist. Well, I do believe in God and a higher power. So, you know, I think we should study all of this stuff. But we should blindly follow none of it. And if we are going to get socialism in the United States, we should be trying to figure out what type of socialism could be applied here. How can we apply socialism to unique American conditions? How can we develop a socialism that will resolve the crisis in the United States and make a better country? How will we do that? How will we do it? Well, that's what the revolutionary should be doing. Not LARPing, not pretending you're in North Korea, not pretending you're in China, but actually developing a formula that could actually work here in the United States. The worth of any plan is in its implementation, as Xi Jinping of China has said. Develop a plan to build a socialist America that could actually work. China, they call their system socialism with Chinese characteristics. The only type of socialism that we ever have here. I don't know what they're going to call it, but in reality, it will be socialism with American characteristics. It will be a socialism specifically suited to our conditions in our country. And that will mean that we've studied a lot of other countries and learned from their successes and their failures and developed our own model. And that a model will emerge through struggle. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple, right? And that's how I view Juche. That's how I view Bolivarianism, Baathism, Marxism, Leninism, socialism with Chinese characteristics, Deng Xiaoping thought, right? Gaddafi's Green Book. I mean, you name it, right? Study all socialism. Learn from all socialism. Blindly adhere to none of it, and develop a model that will work in our time for our country. That is my position. Alrighty, how can the left get to the white working class? Mass economic demands. Look, folks, you may not want to hear this, and again, right, if you wonder if I'm a grifter, if I was a grifter, I would tell you exactly what you wanted to hear. I am not a grifter. I am not telling you what you want to hear. I'm telling you what you need to hear, right? That last part, that was not what you wanted to hear, but it's what you need to hear. This is another thing. Folks, cultural and social issues, you will never change anyone's mind about it. If someone believes in their heart and in their soul that abortion is murder, you will never change their mind about that. You will never convince them that abortion is not murder. If someone really does believe that, you know, gay marriage and homosexuality is just wrong, you will never change their mind about it, right? You may convince them to live and let live, right? But you're never going to convince them that if they really in their heart believe that it's wrong to be gay, they're going to believe that. But when it comes to whether or not their children should eat, when it comes to whether or not the roads in their neighborhood should be paved, when it comes to whether or not their kids and the people that went to their high school who signed up for the U.S. military should get sent off to die in some other country for the profits of bankers, that's where you can win people over. And as long as the left continues to focus on this culture war, as long as it is a culture war against middle American social conservatives, right? The message is not, we need to fix the economy. The message is, you are a bad person if you don't agree with me about this issue. We will never win over millions of Americans. Look at the rallies that are happening today, right? There's big rallies happening today in D.C. All those people are rallying behind Trump, right? They all support Trump. They're there. They're pouring into the streets for Trump. Right? If the left doesn't learn to change its tactics, somebody bigger and scarier than Trump is coming up right behind him. Right? Trump was bad. Trump was bad. But there's somebody, Trump failed pretty much. He didn't fix the country. He didn't make America great again. Wasn't a very successful Bonapartist. There's somebody much scarier than Trump coming up right behind him. Right? There's Trump 2.0. right? As I said on the previous live, out of chaos cometh order. When things are bad, people want a strong state to resolve the crisis. I want a strong state to resolve the crisis, but I want it to be a progressive, socialist state, not a fascist, murderous, destructive state. As the country gets worse, Americans are more and more going to want a strong state to resolve the crisis. If that strong state that resolves the crisis is not a socialist state, that strong state that resolves the crisis will be a fascist state, right? And if it is not a strong state with progressive leftist values, if it is a strong state with right-wing values, that will mean all kinds of destruction and punishment and horror, right? That's the reality. If leftists cannot figure out how to offer a way forward, how to present people with the concept of a government of action that will fight for working families, if leftism remains this culture war, this woke, chaos-loving, destructive, pessimistic death cult, and instead of becoming an optimistic, constructive ideology, if leftism can't get its shit in order, we're going to get fascism. We're going to get fascism pretty quickly, right? If we don't figure out how to get real leftism in order, we're going to get fascism, right? Right? The best friends that the fascists ever had, the best friends that actual fascists and Nazis ever had are the synthetic left. By making leftism synonymous with society getting worse, with chaos, with, they're doing the best favor for actual fascism that you could ever imagine, right? So just keep that in mind. Yes, out of the movement and get to the masses. The movement is a dead end. We need to get to the masses. The British miners' strike of 1984 was a very pivotal moment, right? So in Britain, the mines of Britain, a lot of them were nationalized, but, the miners in Britain, they mined the coal, and Britain had coal power. And the British miners, they were able to win great victories from the ruling class because they had the ability to turn off the power. If they went on strike, the power might go off. So that forced the ruling class to give them many great concessions. The leader of the miners' union was Arthur Scargill, and Arthur Scargill was a communist. I mean, he was an admirer of Stalin. He was a long-time anti-imperialist. He went to Libya, I believe, and met with Gaddafi. He was a revolutionary, Arthur Scargill. He was leader of the miners' union. And Margaret Thatcher, the conservative, came into office determined to break the miners' union. And there was an event in 1984 called the Miners' Strike of 1984, where Margaret Thatcher did everything in her power to try and crush the British miners. And it was a 2-year prolonged battle against the labor movement. And it was Arthur Scargill and the left wing versus the British Tory government. Margaret Thatcher mobilized the British ruling class to try and crush the miners' union. There was also a building up of fascist skinhead forces during that time. It was a pretty chaotic and scary time in British history. But it was an interesting time. I mean, at that point, during the miners' strike, the Trotskyites took over Liverpool. And the city council of Liverpool was taken over by Trotskyites from the International Marxist Tendency. The IMT Trotskyites had infiltrated the Labour Party, and they took control of the city council in the city of Liverpool, for example. There's a lot of heroic activism on behalf of the miners, and it was a big, prolonged fight in British history. The miners' strike of 1984, and it was quite intense. It was a pivotal moment in British history. Arthur Scargill, he was a household name, and it was a huge international event. They used the fact that the miners' union had gone to Libya and had ties to Gaddafi as a scandalous thing. There was red baiting, there was violence. It was a big moment in British history. In the United States, at the same time, Ronald Reagan did the PATCO situation, where he broke the air traffic controllers union, even though they'd endorsed him. They were a Republican union, they were conservative, but they endorsed Reagan in the elections, but they went on strike, and Ronald Reagan fired the air traffic controllers and broke their union. And so in response to that, in the United States, we had a mobilization called Solidarity Day. It was a big national labor rally called by the AFL-CIO. And that it was similar, but it was nowhere as big as the British miners' strike. But neoliberalism was starting to set in Britain and in the United States. Thatcher and Reagan, and just like Ronald Reagan broke the union of the Patco workers and kind of launched a fight against organized labor in the United States. In Britain, there was a similar situation where the labor movement faced a similar attack. The 1980s was the beginning of a real escalation of the war on organized labor. What's kind of fascinating was until then, post-World War II, up until the 80s, labor unions were almost accepted. I mean, almost, right? There was always, the bosses never like unions. The bosses never want workers to be unionized. But within, it was almost like the U.S. bosses, the U.S. political establishment accepted that unions were going to be around. They didn't like them. They passed the Taft-Hartley Law in 1948 that greatly restricted the right of workers to go on strike. Patty Hearst. Greatly restricted the right of workers to go on strike, but, there were many unions that endorsed Republicans. The Teamsters unions endorsed the Republican Party. It wasn't really until the 80s that the anti-union politics really escalated. And Michael Moore, he made a kind of a pro-union film called Roger and Me that was very popular. And, the 1980s was kind of the beginning of neoliberalism. Of course, it really escalated after the fall of the Soviet Union. But yes, that's the British miners' strike. It was a very pivotal moment in British history. A lot of punk rock music is from that era too, like The Clash and all of that. There was a lot of unemployment in Britain, and there was some turmoil and unrest, and there was a rise. They'd had the organized left, big Trotskyist groups in Britain, big communist groups in Britain and such. But in Britain at that point, you also had the rise of a neo-fascist movement, skinheads and the British National Party, John Tyndall and others. There was a kind of a fascist movement that was mobilized in Britain around that time that was anti-immigrant and anti-labor and anti-union. So, it was kind of a pivotal moment. The 1980s was in many ways kind of a dress rehearsal for what's been happening now. A lot of ways, the political crisis we're facing in the West right now is kind of the 80s on steroids. Donald Trump is, in a lot of ways, right? Ronald Reagan was kind of an uprising by the military-industrial complex and the majority of the capitalist class against Jimmy Carter and the slow-growth liberal faction. And in a lot of ways, Trump is a much bigger and much more dramatic uprising against the same slow-growth faction of the ruling class that was with Obama. I mean, this is, a lot of the trends of the 1980s, right? And in the 1980s in Britain, there was a huge rise in fascist groups to fight the left. In the United States, we've seen a rise of Richard Spencer and groups like that. This is, in a lot of ways, there's a parallel. The economic crisis and the confusion is much more dramatic, and the presence of the organized Marxist, Leninist, and actual socialist movement, and the labor movement and left-wing populism is much less. So it's a more complicated crisis. But, there's a saying that Marx used. He said, the first time is tragedy, the second time is farce. Right? And I think, yeah, the 80s, the first time was a tragedy. This is a farce. So there you go. All righty. Music and art to teach socialism. Yes, please. I think one of the best things ever was, Joe Hill. He did, the songs, all the popular songs from the era. He rewrote the lyrics to be class struggle and socialist-oriented lyrics. We need that now. Whatever song Zoomers are listening to, one of you all has to rewrite the lyrics to be about socialism and record your own version of it. Go for it. Do it. Parody is protected under copyright law. You have the right to parody things. As long as you're not copying, you're parodying, you're protected. So go and make a spoof, right? There were those kids who did I Read Some Marx and I Liked It to the tune of I Kissed a Girl and I Liked It. That was amazing. Right? We need more of that. We need more Joe Hill type stuff. We need more socialist art and culture. Absolutely. More socialist music, more socialist memes, more art. Yes, 100%. I'm all for it. All righty. Vietnam passes this labor law. I don't know the specifics of that. I will say that that Vietnam and China have a history of being played against each other. There's a long-standing ethnic rivalry between the two countries, and Vietnam goes back and forth. On some times, Vietnam, realizes the U.S. imperialists are not their friends, but in other cases, Vietnam will do things like host U.S. military battleships and such. And so, this is what Modi learned. Modi is not a socialist, not a revolutionary. He's a bourgeois nationalist, like Erdogan, like Duterte. And he made a deal with Satan, with U.S. imperialism. He made a deal with the U.S. imperialists. He said, you know what, Trump, I'm with you. He made a deal with Trump. He joined the anti-China trade war. And what comes when you make a deal with Satan? What comes when you make a deal with Satan? He doesn't keep his promises, and you get sold down the river, right? So now, if Vietnam has been forced to make some, austerity moves or something, that's what happens. You make a deal with Satan. Yeah, I'm glad you destroyed Vosh in that debate and exposed him as an imperialist. Vosh is showing his chauvinism toward Hakim. Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, no surprise there. But, many socialist countries in Eastern Europe would make deals with U.S. imperialism. In Poland, in Romania, they would get in debt to banks, and the banks would totally screw them over economically, right? And I hope that Vietnam has enough sense that while they need foreign investment, they need foreign corporations there, to not get tricked into joining the U.S. imperialist campaign against China, because it will ultimately hurt them, right? Just like Romania and Poland very, very badly got hurt when they joined the U.S. imperialist campaign against the Soviet Union, right? I mean, just like Modi got very badly hurt by joining Trump's campaign against China. At the end of the day, the imperialists want to economically destroy countries. They don't want to help you. They don't want to build you up, right? The Asian tiger countries, all of them, they were all built up. Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, the U.S. imperialists were building them up during the 80s and 90s as kind of a buffer against communism and allowing them to develop and have Bonapartist regimes. And then you'll remember in 1999, all of the money, the imperialists pulled all of their money right out of Asia. Whoop, right? Hoping to crush the Asian tigers, the crash in the Asian markets. And it was calculated. It was because they had let the Asian tiger countries, these Bonapartist regimes, these very, very authoritarian capitalist states with a heavy amount of government in the economy, Singapore, Taiwan, right, South Korea, others. They had let them develop and do their Bonapartist thing, hoping to build a buffer against communism. And they pulled out all their money, and it crashed all of them. Now, luckily, China kept trading with them, and that they were able to survive. But it was a very dramatic event, the crash on the Asian markets in 1999. And when that happened, right, that shows that you cannot make a deal with the devil. You cannot make a deal with the devil. It's a trick. It's always a trick when you make a deal with the devil, right? U.S. imperialism is the devil. You make a deal with the devil sells you out. That's how it works. That's how it works. And so I don't know about the specifics of this case in Vietnam. I am very impressed with Vietnam. Vietnam has done amazing things to raise people out of poverty. It has built a very, very prosperous society. It's huge amounts of economic growth. The Vietnamese Communist Party, and they have very good grievances against China. Look, China, there's a lot of stuff there you look into where China has been not very nice to Vietnam, but that doesn't justify, I'm just telling you that if Vietnam collaborates with the U.S. imperialists, they're going to get screwed. Look, great example. Belarus, they made a deal. They're a socialist country in Europe. They were the last Soviet republic, and they have this kind of off and on relationship with Russia. And in the last few months, they made a deal with the U.S. imperialists, and they started dumping on Russia and talking against Russia. And there were suddenly positive articles about them in Bloomberg News and other places, admitting the economic successes they've had. And then look what happened. Look what happened during their election. I'm sorry, you cannot make a deal with Satan. You will get stabbed in the back. U.S. imperialism is Satan. And U.S. imperialism, the Wall Street monopolist, the Pentagon war machine, is Satan. It is Satan. And if you make a deal with Satan, Satan will stab you in the back. And that is what we have seen over and over and over again. Deng Xiaoping, he made a lot of deals with the United States. And in 1989, they tried to overthrow him with the Tiananmen stuff, right? That U.S. imperialism does not have any room for any socialist country or any bourgeois nationalist country or any country at all. It wants the whole world poor and underdeveloped and a captive market. It wants profits. It wants profits. That's what it wants. It doesn't have any room for any independent country, any socialist country, any bourgeois nationalist country. It wants chaos and destruction. It wants the world to stay poor so that they can stay rich. This is how imperialism works. Alrighty. CPI reader suggestion. That's a good idea. Folks, what I want to do, I pitched this idea. I would like the Center for Political Innovation to publish a compilation of writings that come out of this Indian strike, out of this Indian protest movement. So if you know any good articles or speeches that are coming out of what's going on in India right now, please send them my way. We'll obviously need to acquire the proper permissions and make sure that we're not, plagiarizing or copywriting anyone's work. But I would like to publish a compilation of speeches and articles by labor leaders and communist leaders in India about their strike that is going on right now. So if you are a person who is tuned into this, if you can find good materials from Indian labor leaders and communist leaders, people from the Communist Party of India, people from the Communist Party of India Marxist, people from the Socialist Unity Center, send them my way, please. I would very much like to have a compilation of articles and speeches from communists and revolutionaries of India about what's happening. I am all about publishing books, folks. We need more Marxist books. We need modern Marxist books. So if you can send me materials, if you know about this, there you go. Should communists talk about God and Satan? I believe in God, but the struggle to bring spirituality and fundamentalists and whatnot. All right. Wow. The super chats just keep coming, but as many of my detractors have noted, I have no problem talking. All right. Should communists talk of God and Satan? All righty. I can keep talking forever, and you can keep asking me questions forever. All righty. Is there overproduction of debt? Well, debt is a little more complicated. Credit, as has been pointed out, credit, and that the next question was credit creation and socialist banking. Look, you can't have capitalism without credit, right? And that's why, the lifting of restrictions on usury was a big part of the emergence of capitalism. The emergence of private banking was a big part of the emergence of capitalism. In Italy and in Britain, the restrictions on the lending of money was key in establishing, as capitalism was emerging, the mercantile system was emerging to replace the feudal order. The mercantile class was emerging. You had the emergence of private bankers. That is absolutely true. Debt is not exactly a product, right? Now, debt it's the lending of money. It is something that enables production to go on because, and it's a way that capitalists can make money simply by having money and not, make any profits. But I wouldn't put debt in the same category as like overproduction of commodities, right? Yes, debt is sold like a commodity, but it is not physical economy, right? It is speculation. It's basically what Marx called fictitious capital, right? It's money that does not represent anything. It is fictitious capital, and I think we need to keep that in mind. And under socialism, I have said many times there needs to be a state monopoly on the lending of money. Only the state should be able to lend money at interest, right? You want to give some money to your friend and he gives it all back to you, but only the state should have the ability to lend money at interest, right? And that way no creditor class emerges. A state bank, a state central bank with a monopoly on the lending of money is absolutely a necessity. Absolutely a necessity in socialism. I think there should be banking under socialism, but there should be a state monopoly, and the community should make the decision about how money is lended. It should be a community board. I think it should be done on a local level as well as a national level. We need a state bank. We need local banks. I think every town, every city, every state should have its own bank. But we should have a national bank as well. But they should all be state-controlled and lend money on the basis of what is in the interests of society as a whole. It should not be on the basis of what will win them back, revenue, right? What will bring in interest and profit revenue. That is my belief. I think there should be a state monopoly on the lending of money. Psychiatry is not a science. Well, that's interesting. I'm certainly not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I think, though, that a lot of what psychiatrists do is about how medicine affects the body, right? That's different. Psychologists are people that give counseling and talk about mental illnesses and work in mental hospitals and stuff. Psychiatrists tend to focus on how medicine affects the body and affects the mind. Psychiatry is a little more scientific than psychology. Psychology is largely, it's called a science, but it's considered to be a humanity, right? But psychiatry is more about medicines and how medicines affect the body. That's what psychiatrists do. They're pill pushers. A lot of people have pointed this out. Most psychiatrists, they're doctors and they push pills all day. They have appointments and they prescribe medicine, right? That's what psychiatrists do. Um, and it's a bit more scientific than psychology, right? They have to understand how these medicines are going to work, how they're going to affect people's bodies chemically. Um, but psychiatry, psychology, both of them are affected tremendously by the society that creates them, and especially because they're dealing with something called the human mind, and what is considered deviant behavior and what is not considered deviant behavior. It's going to be more, I mean, a biologist, can there be a social bias from a biologist? Sure, but there's going to be more room for bias from a psychiatrist than in any other field, right? I mean, you have cancer, right? You got another disease, but psychiatry, there's a subjective factor, right? What seems completely mentally ill to somebody might seem completely sane to somebody else. There's more of a subjective factor, so their bias becomes more present. So, that said, I mean, if somebody, an American, what would socialism with American characteristics look like? Alrighty. But yeah, I mean, there's more room for a bias and such. So yeah. Alrighty. Okay. Artificial AI, machine learning, automation. When I was in Cleveland, there were some friends of mine who had gone to a charter school in Cleveland. They had been struggling in high school, so they transferred to a charter school. And they went to this charter school, and this charter school, instead of having teachers, it was like the size of a gym, and everyone had a desk, and all of their learning was on the computer. And they clicked next, 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 next. They didn't have teachers who taught. They had like minimum wage level employees who stood there, and made sure they kept clicking next, 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 and then answering the multiple choice questions on their computer. Automated learning is certainly something that has hurt the learning process, and that the pandemic has really exacerbated and escalated the automation of teaching. And it's taken the craft out of it. It's taken the relationship between the teacher and the student away. It has really kind of depersonalized education in the United States, which is something that the neoliberal and the free market, charter schools, schools for profit, those folks have been pushing that for a long time. Did the CIA drug Paul Robeson? So yeah, I mean, I think that has happened. Did the CIA drug Paul Robeson? So, it's been going on for a long time. And that's all I can say about that. I mean, they want to destroy teachers' unions. They want charter schools. They want school choice, as they call it. They want schools for profit. They want to depersonalize education. They want to stop paying teachers good benefits and such. I mean, this is an ongoing process that we've seen. Closer look at my bookshelf. Not today. Right now, my wife does arts and crafts, and so she has like her crafts table set up, and there's a lot of things. So it's not ready for you today, but eventually, yes, I will give you a tour of my bookshelf. Just not today. Let the house be in a little bit better of a condition. My wife has been doing arts and crafts, and our house is a little bit messy right now, and I don't want to give you a tour at the moment, but maybe next time or maybe the time after that. Alrighty. Universal basic income, charter schools, no federal job guarantee, neoliberal. Well, here's the thing, right? And that's a good point, right? See, universal basic income has been pushed by Milton Friedman and other people, not because they believe everyone should get a universal basic income, but because they see universal basic income as an alternative to the existing welfare state. They argue, okay, we want to get rid of the Department of Labor and unemployment benefits. We want to get rid of food stamps. So why don't we just have an automatic bank transaction that everyone gets? That way we don't need all these government employees to administer all the social programs. Everyone just gets a bank deposit, $1,000 a month. Everyone gets it, no questions asked. There's no process of applying for it. There's no bureaucrats to oversee it. Just boom, $1,000 a month, and then we can completely gut the state sector of the U.S. economy. That's been put forward a lot. Charter schools, right? I mean, we just talked about charter schools. No federal jobs guarantee. I think that a job should be considered a human right. There should be universal employment. you know. So yeah, neoliberalism. There is a neoliberal side to universal basic income, and that's why I've expressed concerns about Andrew Yang. I tend to have a positive assessment of Andrew Yang, but you know, where I have my concerns, that's one of them, right? That there is I mean, there are concerns with Andrew Yang, right? I read his book, The War on Normal People, and I agree with a lot of what he said, but his solutions, not so much. I mean, there's no such thing as human-centered capitalism. That's one phrase Andrew Yang uses, human-centered capitalism. If it's human-centered, it ain't capitalism. Capitalism is profit-centered. So there's no such thing as human-centered capitalism. So his entire ideology, right, human-centered capitalism, is an oxymoron. There is no such thing as human-centered capitalism. Capitalism is, by definition, production for profit. There, you cannot, it isn't, if it's human-centered, it ain't capitalism, right? And that he's proposing a lot of Bonapartist measures to try and resolve the contradictions facing U.S. society. You know, I think he has lots of potential, right? He's more aspirational, but there's a lot of danger there too. Keep your eye on Andrew Yang. He could be an American Roosevelt. He could be a Hugo Chavez. He could take office and be forced by material conditions to become a socialist. But he could become a Hitler. I mean, he could be very, very dangerous. We have to, you know, he is full of potential. Let me put it that way. Politics in the United States is going in his direction. People like Andrew Yang, with maverick solutions, with charisma, with, you know, talking about the oppression that people suffer, with talking about, you know, the need to fix the economy and use the state to fix the economy. Andrew Yang is the way American politics is going. He is an aspiring Bonapartist, far more so than Trump, right? There's going to be a lot more Andrew Yang type figures that emerge. Some of them might be left wing. I mean, Andrew Yang at this point, someone says he's right wing. He could go either way at this point. I mean, Andrew Yang, there's some things about him that seem very left wing, and there's some things about him that seem very right wing. Andrew Yang could be pushed either way based on who he makes an alliance with, and what road to power he wants to take. He could go either way. He could go either way. I don't agree that he's right wing at this time. He is an aspiring Bonapartist figure. He is a technocrat, and he could go either way. And I think he's full of potential. And I'm excited about him because I see potential there, but there's also bad potential there. So yeah. Alrighty. You know, the fact that he is, you know, he's Chinese. He was born in his family's from Taiwan, which means he's Chinese. Taiwan is China, right? There's already a huge amount of racism against him, and supporting China at this point is put on the left, right? The right wing is in this fury about, you know, Chinese communists and all that. Andrew Yang is not sympathetic to the Chinese government, but it doesn't seem to matter. There's a targeting of the Chinese community. That in and of itself could force Andrew Yang into a progressive position, right? We don't know, right? Now he's announced he's running for mayor. Well, he hasn't announced yet he's running for mayor, but he's talking about running for mayor of New York. It looks like he's going to. Let's see where he goes. Let's see where he goes. Criticism of anarchism. All right. All righty. Okie dokie. All right. Maoists in the Philippines versus Maoists in India. What is the major difference between them? I'll tell you. Why have the Maoists in the Philippines been way more successful than the Maoists in India? Simple. The Maoists in the Philippines have built mass organizations in urban areas. Right? They have a lot of support beyond the countryside. The Maoists in India have declared all the communists in urban areas to be their enemies. The Maoists in the Philippines have built mass organizations that have influence in the cities. They have a lot of people. They have mass organizations that fight for democratic rights and fight for labor unions. They have a big base of support among the Philippine population overall, whereas the Naxals in India are isolated in the rural areas. That's a big difference, right? There in the Philippines, there is a big block of support for the Maoists of the Philippines in the wider society overall. You know, when Duterte first got elected, he was in an alliance with the legal mass organizations that support the Maoists. Now, obviously, Duterte no longer has that alliance. He's been very vicious to the Maoists. But, you know, when he started out, he had their support, and they have a big layer of support among the population, right? And among urban centers, there's a lot of people in the Philippines and urban areas who support them. So it's much more complicated. They have a bigger layer of support within Philippine society. So there you go. Hegel and Spengler. Well, Hegel was a philosopher. He came up with the idea. Basically, from Hegel we get the notion of historical progress, right? That history is like a train speeding forward. We get the dialectic that through contradiction, the battle of ideas is how things advance. He's overall a progressive philosopher. Some of his ideas, there is right Hegelianism, and some of his ideas could lend one to European chauvinism and such. But overall, I mean, Hegel, he lays out some of the basic philosophical concepts that lay the basis for Marxism. That's Hegel. Spengler. Oswald Spengler is the father of the European right wing. He wrote a book, The Decline of the West. He's German. He was not a Nazi. He was a precursor to the Nazis. I think he kind of became a Nazi towards the end of his life, but the Nazis didn't really like him. He had some fundamental disagreements with the Nazis. He wrote a book, I think it was around the time of World War I. He wrote a book basically arguing that Europe was in decline. He argues that civilizations go through a cycle, that there's like, I forget what the cycles are, but it's like they arise and then they become decadent and then they collapse, right? And that there's a cycle of civilizations. And he argued that Europe was in decline. And that was his argument, that European civilization was in decline. One of the signs of Europe being in decline was democracy. Because, it should be that the leaders, people aspire to please the leaders, but democracy reduces the masses to aspiring. The leaders are reduced to aspiring to please the masses. It's a very authoritarian ideology, and it's anti-capitalist in a conservative way. Spengler is very critical of capitalism because he argues that, the beauty of empires, he likes the Roman Empire, he likes empires. It's a very kind of, that civilizations fall apart gradually, and that there's kind of an energy that flows through societies. It's conservatism, and it's far right-wing stuff. And the thing is, it's like, it makes me mad when Dinesh D'Souza and people like that will say things like, oh, Hitler must have been a leftist because he was critical of capitalism. No, there's a long history of right-wing criticism of capitalism, right-wing anti-capitalism, right? Not every right-winger in history was a Ronald Reagan Republican, right? And that, the European far right, not European conservatism in general, but the European far right, right? Spengler, Julius Evola, people like that, right? They have their own views, right? And that there are a number of these right-wing thinkers in Europe, and that there is a right-wing critique of capitalism and modernity. There's a right-wing critique of modernity. Oswald Spengler comes out of that, and he was kind of the father of the European right. And he didn't like the Nazis because the Nazis claimed that they were progressive. The Nazis said that they were in favor of historical progress, and they built a populist movement. It was a right-wing populist movement. But Spengler believed in authority. He didn't believe in rallying the masses to fight for their rights. He believed in obedience. Right? He didn't like the idea of democracy at all. He liked the idea of people following the leader and trying to please the leader. And he liked the idea of building a mass movement of the people, right? The Nazis called their movement a revolution. He didn't believe in that, right? Spengler was so conservative that he thought that the Nazis were too progressive, right? And the Nazis wanted to advance production. And the Nazis weren't conservative enough for Spengler. So, the European far right, and there is a whole history of right-wing anti-capitalism, which people in the United States are not aware of, and, it's kind of sad. I have a very positive view of Daniel Ortega and Nicaragua. They have done amazing things in Nicaragua to eradicate poverty. I really have our TV shows like Masked Singer and Our Empire's Dumber, I have never heard of that. So I can't, I kind of get what you're saying. So Masked Singer, like gladiators. I kind of get what you're saying. I'll actually answer that as we get to it. Okay. But yeah, I tend to think the Sandinistas have done a very good job eradicating poverty, their micro-entrepreneur program, providing health care, wiping out illiteracy. I have a very positive view of Ortega and Murillo and the Sandinista government of Nicaragua. They've done amazing, good things for the country. It's much better off than Guatemala, much better off than Honduras. The Sandinistas have been good leaders, I think. I have a very positive view of them. All right, Charles de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle was kind of like the military strongman in France after World War II, anti-communist, right-wing, but he was a little more like managerial. He had I believe Dirgeism, they call it, which is state government, control, government cooperating it was kind of like fascism, or like kind of like the corporatist economic theory. Dirigism is associated with him. I don't generally have a positive view of Charles de Gaulle, but you know, he was a right-wing figure in French politics that emerged after World War II. That's Charles de Gaulle, and you know, he was an anti-communist, but he was, you know, he was again dirigism, and you know, again, let me repeat. You don't have to be a Ronald Reagan Republican to be a conservative. There are many people on the right who have right-wing criticism of capitalism. Dinesh D'Souza, who's on TV educating people about politics, has never heard of this before, but you do. Patty Hearst, well, she wasn't an actress. She was the heiress to the Hearst fortune. The person who asked the question said, that was in the 1970s, okay? So, and this is how it happened. So in the 1970s, there was so there were a number of Maoist groups that were being formed. There were all kinds of new communist groups. So there was the Revolutionary Union. People have heard of that, which is the precursor to the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RU. And they were in the Bay Area in San Francisco. You know, it's Bob Avakian and Label Bergman, and there's a guy named Bruce Franklin, who actually is now like a big literature professor at Rutgers University, and he teaches classes on literature, and he's written books about the Vietnam War and stuff. But he was a big activist back in the 70s, and he was a member of the Revolutionary Union, and so you know there was a divide. Right now, the group that the Revolutionary Union opposed Cuba. They said that Cuba was, because it aligned with the Soviet Union against China, they said it wasn't really socialist. Plus, the RU was against what they called urban guerrilla warfare, which was trying to build some kind of armed group. So Bruce Franklin and his followers quit. They quit the Revolutionary Union, and they started their own organization called Venceremos. It's called Venceremos because that's, you know, we shall overcome. It's the slogan of the Cuban Revolution. So, you know, Venceremos was formed. It was this Maoist communist group that kind of liked Cuba, and it was led by Dr. Bruce Franklin. And they were in San Francisco. And some of their members, they were trying to recruit. They had this ultra-left idea they're going to lead a revolution. It's a mostly white organization, but they're going to lead a revolution of impoverished African Americans. A lot of that in the 60s, right? You know, it's like they're going to lead this revolution of impoverished African Americans. They're kind of white college kids or whatever. So a number of members of Venceremos started going to the jails in San Francisco to try and recruit prisoners. And there were 4 or 5 of them who started going to a jail in San Francisco, and they recruited a guy named Don DeFries. I believe it was Don DeFries, and he was in jail for some criminal stuff. And Don DeFries was actually like a very intelligent man who was in jail, and these Maoists went to the jail and tried to recruit him. And I guess he recruited them. They ended up quitting the Venceremos group. They stopped working with H. Bruce Franklin, and I think they broke, if I'm not mistaken, I think they actually broke Don DeFries out of jail. And so Don DeFries and like 5 other people had their own communist group, and they called themselves the Symbionese Liberation Army. What's interesting is that the word Symbionese is not a real word, okay? They made it up, and it comes from the biological process of symbiosis. You know, and their symbol was a rattlesnake with 3 heads, and it was this crazy little tiny cult of like 5 or 6 people, I think, is all they ever had. And they were left adventurists, and they were a split from a split of a Maoist group, and they were wacky, okay? And the leader was this man named Don DeFries, who, like, they had gone to the jail to try and recruit him to be a communist, and he recruited them, and they had this weird, wacky group. And so they had the Symbionese Liberation Army. The first thing that the Symbionese Liberation Army did, and this is why, I mean, no respect, I'm sorry, I oppose left adventurism, right? And this is a great example of why left adventurism is really stupid, all right? So their idea, left adventurists often have this fantasy. Well, we're going to do some really dramatic act of violence. We're going to do this really dramatic act of violence. People are going to see it, and then they're going to rise up because we did it. We're going to inspire them, right? Propaganda of the deed. This is what the terrorists in Russia thought. At the time of Lenin, there was a group of people who called themselves the terrorists, and they had the same idea, right? We're going to shoot the czar or whatever, and people will see it, and then they'll rise up. So this is a left adventurist group. So they noticed that at a high school in Oakland, the first black principal, I believe, I think he was the first black principal of a high school in Oakland, they required all students to wear ID, right? And it was this Marcus Foster was his name. He was the principal. And he was very well loved by the students because it was like a big deal to have a black principal in a high school in a black neighborhood, right? But they did require all the students at this high school to wear an ID at all times, right? So the Symbionese Liberation Army got the idea that they would assassinate Marcus Foster, and that would inspire the students, the high school students of Oakland, of this black area, to rise up and overthrow the government or whatever. So they murdered Marcus Foster. Marcus Foster was this first black principal in Oakland. It's horrendous, right? This is a big victory for the black community to finally have a principal of a school, and they killed him. And they didn't just shoot him. Like, they hollowed out the bullets they shot him with cyanide, right? So he was shot with bullets full of cyanide. Like, they killed this guy. They really killed him. They found Marcus Foster, this black principal, and they shot him full of cyanide. I mean, they pumped him full of bullets full of cyanide. I mean, they murdered him. And Marcus Foster was killed. And of course, did all the students, see that and say, yeah? No, of course not. All the students at the high school were very offended. This is like the first black principal of a high school in Oakland, right? It was a stupid, murderous thing. That was like the first thing the Symbionese Liberation Army ever did. Stupid, immoral, wrong. I mean, I can't think of anything more dumb for a communist group to do. Not just dumb, but like murderous, right? I mean, they murdered the first black principal of a high school in Oakland. Yeah, that's what they did, right? That was the first thing they did. Then after that, they found out that Patty Hearst. Now, Patty, do you know about the Hearst family? William Randolph Hearst. That's the movie Citizen Kane. Big media, right-wing media family, right? The daughter of William Randolph Hearst, Patty Hearst, this wealthy heiress, this rich girl, they found out where she was going to college, and they kidnapped her. They took her hostage. They kidnapped her. And it was very famous, right? It was this very famous, wealthy heiress girl. She's been kidnapped by a group of communist, people claiming to be communist revolutionaries. A group of crazy, wacky left adventurists kidnapped this wealthy heiress, right? And so it was a big news story. It was a big news story. And, it was a big news story. And so Patty Hearst was taken hostage. And I will say, so then the Symbionese Liberation Army demanded that free food get distributed to low-income people in Oakland. That was one of their demands to release Patty Hearst. So the family of, the Hearst family actually gave like $2 million of free food away to people. And what was particularly surprising was that, first of all, the U.S. economy was bad at that point, but it wasn't anywhere near as bad as it now. There was a slight economic downturn, but, it was a pretty good U.S. economy, number one. Number two, the U.S. media just went over the top, saying that anyone who would get free food because of Patty Hearst's kidnapping was a bad person. Ronald Reagan, who was governor of California at the time, the free food was being given away. He said that he hoped there was an outbreak of botulism, and that the poor people who all got the food, that was distributed by the Hearst family would all die. Like, it was really, like, the message of all the TV and all the newspapers and all the media was, if you line up and get some of that free food from the Hearst family, you're a bad person. You're encouraging terrorism. But thousands of people turned out to get free food. And that showed that even in the good times in the United States, even when the economy was very good, a lot of poor people were hungry. And they lined up to get free food. And thousands and thousands of people lined up to get free food, that was distributed because this wealthy heiress was taken away. Well, that's one small good thing that came out of the left adventurous terrorism of the Symbionese Liberation Army. That's about it. Nothing else good ever came of it. But they exposed how there were desperate, hungry people in Oakland, California. So there was a big line of people to get free food. Now, interesting side note. This is where it gets wild. The police were very angry at these poor people for lining up to get the free food. And I think every, free food came with, a copy of the manifesto of the Symbionese Liberation. 12 of them, okay. It was a small group. So the police actually started picking up turkeys and throwing them at low-income black people, and there were riots that broke out when the free food was distributed. The police started basically, throwing turkeys and food at people and injuring, and beating up on the poor black people who lined up to get the food. I mean, it's just a horrendous incident. It shows how evil U.S. society is, right? When a bunch of poor people are going to get free food, Ronald Reagan says, "I hope there's an outbreak of botulism," and the police can't hand it out without beating somebody up, and it was an awful incident. Yeah, I mean, so supposedly Patty Hearst, when she was in the group, she claims she got brainwashed. They brainwashed her. So she changed her name. She got a new name. She was Tanya. And so she started robbing banks along with the group that kidnapped her. It's all a big crazy story. It was a big 1970s thing. What is also very weird, and this is what's also very weird, it's a very strange story, right? Very, very strange story. Another weird aspect of it was that Sarah Jane Moore, who was an Air Force intelligence officer, right? The U.S. government was wondering if they could catch the Symbionese Liberation Army. So she was sent by the U.S. government, FBI, whatever, to infiltrate the people that were helping distribute the free food. Her name was Sarah Jane Moore. And she was helping, she was a spook. She was a government informant. And she's among the people distributing free food. And, she's this U.S. Air Force intelligence officer. She's an informant. And she's suddenly gets excited by the idea that, that this terrorist group is giving people free food. So Sarah Jane Moore went on to shoot or to try and murder. She failed, but to try and assassinate Gerald Ford, right? So it's a very weird story. There was an assassination attempt on Gerald Ford, President of the United States. Sarah Jane Moore was an FBI informer sent to infiltrate the people giving out the free food to see if they could help catch the Symbionese Liberation Army. And she ended up being inspired and based on that went and tried to kill Gerald Ford. And went to prison for decades and decades. It's a really, really strange story. But yeah, it's a really bizarre incident. Ultra-left terrorist adventurist group, Symbionese Liberation Army, murders a black principal, disgusting, kidnaps a rich girl, so they're all over TV, gets free food distributed in an African-American neighborhood, and the U.S. government is so mad that it just, they have to throw turkeys at low-income black people, and so I mean it's a very bizarre incident, right? Very strange incident, and ultimately, I mean, I think the Symbionese Liberation Army is a case study as to why left adventurism is bad. Okay, that is a case study of left adventurist groups being bad. It's a bad, not a good thing, right? Left adventurism, right? Do you think that anyone saw them kill the first black principal in Oakland and said, "Oh boy, I want to be a communist now"? No. Do you think anyone, I mean, the whole thing, other than the only possible little good thing that came out of that was that it revealed how much hunger there was among low-income black people in Oakland, and how much the low-income black people of Oakland did not trust the U.S. government, that they would go out and get that free food. Number one, there was hunger. Number two, it didn't matter, right? The fact that there was a huge stigma being attached to anybody who could possibly ask for that food, well, it showed that a lot of the black community didn't care, and they were still going to go get that food. And then the fact that Ronald Reagan said, "Oh, I hope there's an outbreak of botulism," the fact that the police started, throwing turkeys at people and injuring them, the whole story is a really, really strange story, but there's a lot there. What I take from it is that left adventurism is bad, and that it's a very, very strange incident. And it's weird. People get mad if you talk about this, but let me be very clear, okay? So this had nothing to do with the Revolutionary Communist Party, okay? The Revolutionary Communist Party came out of the RU. Well, the Venceremos organization was a split from the RU that believed in urban guerrilla warfare. Okay, and when these people started the Symbionese Liberation Army, they split from the Venceremos organization. So this has nothing to do with Bob Avakian and the Revolutionary Communist Party. This is a split from a split of theirs, right? That the RU, Bruce Franklin broke with the RU, formed Venceremos. Bruce Franklin had nothing to do with these people, right? These people were in his group, and they quit and started the Symbionese Liberation Organization. So let me be clear. I'm not smearing Bruce Franklin. He's a professor, whatever, right? I'm not smearing Bob Avakian. I'm saying that there's a group of people that split from a split, and that's where these people were. And one thing I will say, and this is very interesting, is when there was one of them who was living in Ohio near Cleveland, and he died. He died, at some point. And one thing the Workers' World members that I knew went to his memorial just because this is a leftist, a prominent leftist who died. And they said that his memorial was packed. There was like hundreds of people attended the memorial for this Symbionese Liberation Army guy, Murray Bookchin. And that was pretty bizarre, right? But apparently, this guy who had been a leader of the Symbionese Liberation Army, when he died, he had a memorial service in Ohio, and it was like standing room only. Hundreds of people turned out for this guy. And that's the weird thing. It's kind of like the Red Army faction in Germany, that there are a lot of people who will kind of be attracted to left adventurists on the basis of it's romanticized, right? We've all seen movies about, cowboys and, outlaws and all of that. There's a lot of people who left adventurism is like a fantasy that they have. They would never actually do it, right? But they it's the same with the weathermen, right? There's a lot of leftists who study the weathermen and find them so fascinating because it has this sexy, romantic violence aspect to it, right? But that's not real, all right? That's Hollywood. That's movies, right? Terrorism, people die. People get killed. People get very badly hurt. I mean, we've all seen movies, but come on, folks. Like in the real world, did anything good come out of what the Symbionese liberation did? Very little. I mean, other than exposing so we need to oppose left adventurism. Get to the masses. Get to the masses. There's no shortcut. There is no shortcut for getting to the masses. If the American people in their millions don't come to understand socialism, nothing's going to change. There's no shortcut. There is no shortcut for getting to the masses. We must get to the masses with scientific socialism. There's no terrorism shortcut, right? There's no, elect Democrats shortcut. There's no, urban black people rebel and seize the government shortcut. There is no shortcut. Few lives ago, I talked about possibilities for revolution in the United States and critiquing. There is no shortcut. Get to the masses. Get to the masses with a real socialist message. Get to the masses. That's all we can do. If we don't get to the masses, if we don't get to average Americans, if average Americans in Iowa and Wisconsin and Kansas City and Oklahoma don't say, you know what, I've looked into socialism and I think it's the right system. If that doesn't start to happen, there is no hope, and there is no shortcut. There is no shortcut. And often it's a slow, painful process. It's a slow, painful process, but there is no shortcut. All right. Should communists talk about God and Satan? I don't know. Why not, right? I mean, I was shocked. I will say this. One of my detractors, Skippy the Bear, in one of his long rants against me, I was blown away by the fact that he said a number of times, he would make statements that showed he was kind of out of touch. Like, I would say things like, they say communism's failed everywhere it's ever been tried. And he'd be like, nobody says that. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. One of the things he said that was like that, he said, no one over the age of 7 believes in good and evil. I think they do. I'm pretty sure they do. Most people in the world believe in good and evil, my friend. Right? Most people in the world believe in good and evil. That's why every movie you've ever watched has a hero and a villain. All right? Most people in the world believe in good and evil, right? Maybe Skippy the Bear, none of his friends believe it. None of his friends think socialism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. But, on planet Earth, people believe in good and evil. Evil exists. Evil does exist. And the way people generally understand good and evil is in terms of God and Satan, right? And I will say that it can be alienating to people. You should never force your religious beliefs on people, right? I have good friends who are Muslim, good friends who are Jewish, I have good friends who are atheists, and I think that there should be no religious test for any membership in any revolutionary organization. There should be no, that when we build socialism, we're building a secular movement. We're not building a religious movement. That said, I don't think there's anything wrong with people talking about good and evil, God and Satan, in their. And I'm being real with you. I'm telling you what I think. Okay, and I believe in God and I believe in Satan, and that's that. I'm not representing any organization here. I'm just telling you what I think. And so I, as a socialist, do believe in good and evil. And I do believe in God and Satan. So I can talk about that. If you don't, that's okay. You don't have to talk about it. And there should never be an atmosphere created in a socialist group where you're uncomfortable, right? I feel like a socialist organization should never, become a religious organization. A socialist organization should never, be demanding certain beliefs on the part of its members. It should never make people who are atheists or people that are Jewish or Muslim or Christian feel unwelcome. I will be honest, that there are times that, well, I don't want to get into that. That's a whole other conversation. But honestly, I believe in no religious test, and a revolutionary organization should be religiously neutral. It should be a home to people of all faiths who want socialism, period. And so does that mean that people of faith can't get up and talk about God and Satan? They can. People of no faith have the right to express their views just as much. And I don't buy the argument. I've heard this all the time. It's saying that you don't believe in God is disrespecting all the people who believe in God. Give me a break. Come on. I'm sick of that. I was in college, someone would get up and, there is no God. Oh, you can't say that in front of me. I'm a Christian. Yes, you can. Just like if you're allowed to say there is a God, then he's allowed to say there isn't one. Right? That's how these things work, right? And that religious Christians can be so sensitive, right? Hey, if you're allowed to talk about your beliefs, he's allowed to talk about his, right? If you're allowed to get up and say God is real, then he's allowed to get up and say God is not real, right? That's how it works. That's how it works, right? And religious evangelicals are so, they take it as a personal attack, right? And it's so childish, right? It really is, right? Whenever anyone else shares their religious beliefs, they take it personally, like it's an attack on them. But they should be allowed to constantly spew their religion everywhere, and that's just how it is, right? And that is not good, right? That is not good. And I have very, 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 very low tolerance for that kind of thinking. It annoys the crap out of me. Look, no one should ever be made to feel uncomfortable for saying that they don't believe in God, and no one should ever be able to be made to feel uncomfortable for saying that there is a God. Your religion is your personal business. You have the right to be religious. You have the right to not be religious. That's how it works, right? There is freedom of religion, and there is freedom from religion, right? Everyone has the right to deal with religion in their own way, to express their religious belief in their own way, and the government has no say in it. And no, it is not oppressing. It is not oppressing Christians for atheists to express themselves, and it's not oppressing atheists for Christians to express themselves. Everyone has the right, and the government has no place promoting any religion. The government, God we trust shouldn't be on our money. It shouldn't be, right? That's a religious position, right? And I don't believe that in God we trust should be on our money, because that is an establishment of religion. Millions of Americans do not believe in God. So when we put in God we trust on our money, that's the government basically saying to millions of Americans who don't believe in God, you are wrong. Well, no, that's not how it works. We have a secular government here in the United States. Separation of church and state, folks. Secular government, right? In the United States, we have made a decision as a society not to have a religious government, and let's do it already. I'm sick of, and yeah. So anyway, I answered that question. Okay, alrighty. What would socialism with American characteristics look like? Well, I've said many times that will develop over the course of struggle, right? That's for the American people to decide, and what it means is that it'll be about resolving the contradictions in U.S. society. I personally think that entrepreneurialism will have a big part of socialism with American characteristics. I think that the American people are very entrepreneurial and hardworking. They like to go out and get things done. I also think that optimism will be a big part of socialism with American characteristics, and that there will be a lot of harnessing that go-get-em, motor-minded American spirit. I think that socialism with American characteristics will most likely have a big emphasis on civil liberties and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, like we just talked about. I think that socialism with American characteristics will probably emphasize cultural diversity, right? Because the USA is so diverse right now. But at the end of the day, this is just my thoughts, right? It will be the American people in their millions through struggle that build socialism with American characteristics. Did the CIA drug Paul Robeson? I think they did, right? I think that's a fact that he was in the Soviet Union. They put LSD in his drink or something. I think that happened. Yeah, Lily, I think you're right about that. I think he did. Criticism of anarchism. My biggest criticism of anarchism is put two anarchists together. What the hell is anarchism? Anarchism is like, it's not even a political philosophy. It's like a vibe, right? It's like a feeling or something, right? Bakunin is completely different from Proudhon. There's anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-communism, anarcha-feminism, not anarcho, because that's sexist, anarcha-feminism, you put two, I'll just be real with you, right? There are anarcho-communists that are very ideological. There are anarcho-syndicalists that are very ideological. But the overwhelming majority of people that I have met who call themselves anarchists are not. The overwhelming majority of people who call themselves anarchists, I ask them, oh, you're an anarchist. Do you like Bakunin? No, man, I have my own ideas. I've never heard of Bakunin, right? I do my own thing. That's why I'm an anarchist. No one can tell me what to do. Woohoo! Right? Come on. I've got better things to do than engage with people like that. That's just, grow up, please. Grow up, please. For a lot of people, anarchism is more of a fashion statement. It's more of a cultural thing. But, there's like my friend Brenton, brilliant guy. He's got very well thought out beliefs. He's an anarcho-communist. Very cool, right? One thing that blows my mind is free marketeers, anarcho-capitalists are welcome, among anarchists, right? Hey, oh, you're an anarchist who likes capitalism. Well, welcome, great. Anarchism is more of a cultural motif. I've also noticed that a lot of anarchists are actually social democrats. There's a lot of people that claim to be anarchists because it sounds radical, it sounds sexy, but if you really push them about what they believe, they are social democrats, right? They believe socialism will come about one step at a time, gradually. They vote for the Democrats. They hate all existing socialist countries. It's like like Noam Chomsky, right? He says he's an anarchist. Noam Chomsky says to vote for the Democrats. Noam Chomsky basically believes socialism is kind of gradually evolved from capitalism. Noam Chomsky says that all the socialist countries are not really socialist. Noam Chomsky is not an anarchist. Noam Chomsky is a social democrat, but he calls himself an anarchist because it sounds badass. The overwhelming majority of anarchists, I am convinced, are actually social democrats, but saying that they're an anarchist, they're like, but I want, like, after the revolution, like a totally free society. We all want that. We all want that, right? Anyone who is an anti-capitalist wants a stateless, classless world, right? We all want that, right? Social democrats want that. Communists want that. Anarchists want it. The difference between a communist and a socialist and a social democrat, I guess I should say that the difference between a Marxist-Leninist and a social democrat and an anarchist is not about what the goal is. We all have the same goal of a world with no state and no classes and no coercion. The difference is, how do you get there? Social democrats believe that gradually, one step at a time, it comes out of capitalism, very, very gradually. That's what social democrats believe, right? Marxist-Leninists, on the other hand, believe it is a struggle for political power and the state can change hands. There is a clear event horizon. There is a revolution. One day, the working class seizes control of the state and moves towards socialism. That's what they believe. They are revolutionary socialists. They are Marxist-Leninists. It is a struggle for political power, and they will seize political power and create socialism that way. Not that it just happens gradually. No. They believe there is a definitive moment. Plus, Marxist-Leninists are anti-imperialists. They believe the West is not the best, right? That's Marxism-Leninism. Anarchism is the belief that socialism can be created without coercion, right? It is anarcho-syndicalism is rejecting all politics. It's just about the class struggle on the job. The unions will be formed. The unions will seize their individual workplaces. That's anarcho-syndicalism. It's unionism rejecting politics. Anarcho-communism, Marxism without Lenin, they reject the struggle for political power. It is only an economic struggle, right? Right? That's the difference between the three philosophies. They all want to get to a stateless, classless world. Social democrats want to build it gradually, one step at a time. Marxists seek to seize political power, right? Anarchists seek to create the non-capitalist world without coercion. That is the difference. right? That is the difference, right? But yes, social democrats eventually, the goal is thousands of years from now, through gradual implementation, they'll get to the total goal of communism. Marxist-Leninists want to seize state power. Anarchists want to build socialism without coercion, a voluntary socialism, and they reject political power, political action. Alrighty. Is masked singer like gladiators? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of dumb. I've seen that on. I think my wife's been watching that before, and I've seen it. Whatever. I mean, the people, they put on a mask and you guess who it is or whatever. But I mean, the gladiatorial shows in Rome played a particularly important role in that they desensitized the population to violence. They trained the population to be indifferent to the suffering of others, to dehumanize people, and to be sadistic. And they particularly played a role in the trend of what you call the hedonist in Roman society. Hedonism, the idea that one should live for pleasure. Hedonism and sadism were connected, right? And the average Roman who went to the gladiatorial shows and enjoyed watching people being eaten by lions and fighting each other to the death, was indifferent to the suffering of these people, was also going to wild parties. They talk about how one of the ancient Roman emperors, he had an assistant with a big long feather. And the assistant's job was to stuff this big long feather down his throat so he would vomit after he ate a big feast, so then he'd go and eat some more. And that the gladiatorial shows were about training Romans to be indifferent to the suffering of other people, right? Mainly people who were non-Roman. There was kind of a tribal aspect to it. On top of that, it was about desensitizing them to violence, and it was about getting them to kind of think in terms of pleasure, right? It's very exciting to watch people fighting each other. It's very exciting and thrilling to watch acts of violence. That's the role that they played. I don't know, Masked Singer, I don't think it does that. I mean, are people fighting and killing each other in that show? I don't think so. Maybe violent movies play that role in our society. Maybe the pornographication of our culture and our art plays that role, but I don't know if Masked Singer plays that role specifically. So I don't think that particular show is playing that role, but maybe you can talk about that. Murray Bookchin. He's an anarcho-communist, right? And he grew up in the Communist Party USA, and he became an anarchist. He wrote a screed called Listen Marxist that was distributed to communists in the 1960s. Murray Bookchin was, he was probably, of all the anarchist voices post-World War II, he was the smartest, and he criticized anarcho-primitivism and rejected it. And he was he understood Marxism, right? He was an anarchist who understood Marxist ideology. And so I'll give him that. Now, I don't agree with his overall worldview, but I find him interesting to listen to, and he understood Marxist ideology far more than any anarchist I've ever listened to. I could listen to him talk for a while. He seemed like he really knew what he was talking about. And that's why he was so critical of anarcho-primitivism, because he understood that the goal is material abundance. So, folks, on that note, I'm going to wrap this up. Thanks for joining me. It's been fun. It's always fun. I'm hopefully going to stream tomorrow night as well. So my best wishes for now. I will conclude the way I always end. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Have a good night.